Leonard, do you know you're muted?
When did that happen?
Well,
One more time, as we have some technical difficulties, as they used to say at the CBC. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to the May 19th Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk this morning is Ms. Sky Snellgrove. Today's Finance and Audit Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192, governing open meetings during a state of emergency, and the Provincial Health Officer Order regarding gatherings and events. Therefore, as there is no in-person location, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually, and question period will be suspended throughout the duration of the provincial health orders in effect. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove, please.
Thank you. We're adding a recess at 10:30 a.m. Agenda item 5B, project planning overview. We're adding 2021 to 2025 project plan handout and add 2021 to 2025 reserve balances handout.
I'm guessing it's a City Hall issue.
I'm over in Bowen, so I'm on, so I'm not sure if it is just all.
I can see everybody, but yes, the mayor and Sky have frozen. Are you guys hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Automatically.
There he is.
Good morning. I have to say that mine has muted itself automatically twice. Did all of you hear Ms. Snellgrove? Because the screen froze and I couldn't. Did all of you hear? Did any?
She stopped. She froze after agenda item 5B. She didn't move on to agenda item 7C.
Your worship, I believe it might be the hard computer, like wired in, because I'm in City Hall, but I'm on my laptop and I seem to not be freezing like you all. So I could carry on. And oh, there she is again.
Sorry, we're having some internet and phone issues here. I take that I cut out during the introduction of late items.
Yes. Maybe you could do it again.
Sure, yep. So we're adding a scheduled recess at 10:30 a.m. Agenda item 5B, project plan overview. We're adding the 2021 to 2025 project plan handout and adding the 2021 to 2025 reserve balances handout. Agenda item 7C, we're adding a report titled Stadium District Development Plan and Potential Interim Improvements. We're adding a report titled Draft Amenity Improvement Concepts for Westwood Lake Park to become agenda item 7E and re-letter the remaining items accordingly. And agenda item 7K, we're adding a report titled One-Time Bonus Gas Tax Funding.
Thank you very much. A motion for approval of the agenda as amended. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. A motion for adoption of the minutes as circulated. Moved Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The presentations is the 2022-2026 Financial Plan Development. Ms. Legan, you're going to introduce this. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Your Worship. There are two presentations which Ms. Mercer will handle, as well as all finance-related reports this morning. So I'll turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ms. Mercer, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Your Worship, and Council. So is the presentation able to be put up on the screen? Thank you. So now that the 2021 to 2025 financial plan has been completed and adopted, we are starting the budget process for the 2022 to 2026 budget cycle. So in today's workshop, I will take you through an overview of the planning process and the budget timeline. And then we will review where we are starting at with the 2022 budget cycle. So the starting budget assumes maintaining current service levels and the reopening of the Bevan Pool. Those are the two main assumptions. And so once I'm done the presentation, the committee can discuss what your expected outcomes are for this upcoming budget cycle. Next slide, please. And then the next one. So the next couple of slides I'll go through quickly because you've all seen this information before. But from February till May, the financial planning team and departments are busy working on updating their 10-year project plans for the upcoming budget cycle. And then in May, as we're doing today, council provides us direction on priorities and expectations for the upcoming financial plan. And at the end of the month, all of the draft 10-year project plans are completed. In June, the financial planning, along with department managers and directors, start the operating budget development. And that, next slide, please. And then in July, all of those operating budgets are completed in their draft form. In July as well, all of the business cases for the upcoming budget cycle are also completed by the end of the month. During August and September, the financial planning team compiles all of the information gathered from the project planning as well as the operating budgets and prepares the reports and analysis as well as the budget in brief. And business cases at this point are reviewed by senior management, as well as senior management also reviews all of the information compiled by the financial planning department. Next slide, please. So in early October, all of our business plans for each department are completed and the budget presentation materials are finalized. And then in late October or early November, we come to council and present the 2022 departmental business plan presentations, as well as the 2022 to 2026 project highlight presentation. And we seek further direction from council. During that time, we also do our public consultation, which is usually through an e-town hall meeting. Next slide, please. In December, council adopts the 2022 user rate bylaws for sanitation, water, and sewer. And that's so we can charge the new rates starting January 1st for each one of those utilities. As well, this year we are hoping to have council adopt the provisional 2022 to 2026 financial plan bylaw before the end of the year. So we've bumped up some of our dates a little bit in hopes of being able to get a financial plan adopted before the end of the year. So from January to early April, the financial planning group is busy updating the financial plan for updated estimates or other council decisions made in that time. And then in April, we bring all of that information back in the final financial plan and seek further direction from council. And then in late April to early May, we bring back the final financial plan bylaw for adoption. At the same time, we bring the property tax bylaw for adoption as well. And all of that needs to be done before May 15th of each year. Next slide, please. So that's just a quick summary of the upcoming kind of deadlines and due dates for our upcoming budget cycle. And now I'll start to talk about what the budget starting point is. And that is currently year 2 of the of the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. Next slide, please. So the projected starting point for the property tax increase is 3.6%. And that's 1% for the general asset management reserve and 2.6% for a general property tax increase. So as you can see from the table, in 2021, approximately 1.8 million was used from reserves as a funding strategy for COVID recovery to reduce taxes. And to smooth the transition away from reserve funding, the reserve funding drops to $800,000 in 2022 and $200,000 in 2023. So unfortunately, this type of one-time funding puts upward pressure on future year tax increases for 2022 to 2024. And so when the funding, when the reserve funding drops off, the shortfall will likely be made up for, through property taxation. And that's why we've tried to lessen that blow with petering out the reserve funding to reduce taxes. The next slide, please. The projected user fee increases are 4% for asset management for the for sanitary sewer user fees, a 5% increase for water user fees, and that's a 5% for a general increase. So as you note, the 2.5% increase that was for asset management ended in 2021. So there's only the 5% for general increases. And the annual garbage fee is $190 per household. So staff are working on bringing the water and sewer user fee review to council sometime later this year, and that will inform future year increases, and we're hoping to get that to you as soon as possible. Next slide, please.
Councillor Bonner has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was just a little one. If we go back to the screen that has the tax increases. Thank you. Now you mentioned there's going to be upward pressure coming for 2022 to 24. Is that what we're seeing here? Because it doesn't look like that much of an upward pressure.
Right. So through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So yes, you are seeing we lessen it as we try to lessen it as we go along. So from 2021 to 2022. We dropped $1 million worth of funding in reserves to reduce taxes. So that's pushed the tax increase higher in 2022. And there's a combination, and I'm going to go through the tax tax increase drivers in a few slides. So you'll see that it's a combination of things, but the drop in reserve funding to reduce taxes does have an impact in 2022 and pushes that increase a little bit higher.
Before we go any further, I just want to say the only people who show up on my screen are myself, Ms. Mercer, Councillors Bonner and Martman. So if any of you have questions, you're just going to literally, unless there's some automatic thing, if you stick your hand up, you're going to pop up on my screen. You're just going to have to interrupt politely. Thank you.
We go to slide 10, please. Oh. Too far. You're just all getting a preview of what's to come. Oh, one more. There we go. Thank you. So I just wanted to outline some of the assumptions that we have in our 2022 budget year. So for revenues, recreation and parking revenues are assumed to return to pre-pandemic levels. And we assume that the casinos are reopened and that casino and investment revenues, we've taken a 2-year transition to get back to pre-pandemic levels. So by 2023, we are anticipating pre-pandemic levels for these revenue sources. With regards to expenditures, we have assumed that the Beban Pool will reopen as of January 1st, and that staffing at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center returns to pre-pandemic requirements, and that we have no facility ambassadors in 2022. Excuse me. We've also assumed $1.2 million a year in 2022 to 2025 for growth. And then the reason that we keep it at 1.2 is that growth fluctuates each year. And the last time we saw a large growth number like we did this year, it was lower, albeit a little bit, was in 2013. And 2013 was really high, but 2014 came in about $800,000 lower. So it's never a sure thing. So we budget conservatively and keep it at 1.2%.
Your worship?
Go ahead.
Regarding the casinos, if I may, through you, regarding the casinos, do they pay us as they open, as they go along, or do they pay us after a year of operation?
Ms. Fuller can correct me if I'm wrong, but they pay, I believe we get a payment twice a year, and it's based on a percentage of casino revenues. So that's why we've kind of split it over 2 years to get back to pre-pandemic levels, as we don't know quite when they're going to open and if people will be going to the casinos at the same rate they were before the pandemic. So it's based on how much revenue they pull in. Slide, please. So the next two slides relate to the 2022 budget drivers. So I'll go through each one of them. I'll just do a high-level summary, but I can answer questions if needed. So the first item is the asset management, and this is the 1% to fund future funding gap that we have identified. So that's 1.125 million. And the Beban Park complex for the physical plant. So the expectation, like I've said, is the Beban pool, it opens January 1st, and therefore operating costs such as utilities are reflected in this increase. With the pool reopening, costs for chemicals and materials and supplies will go back to normal levels and are reflected in this amount. So with regards to the election expense, when we say net, because we get a little bit of recovery from the school district when we put the election on. So as you're all aware, we have a municipal election in 2022, and therefore funding is needed for that, and it's reflected in this budget. Parking is expected to operate at no cost to the taxpayers in 2022. So if you remember, in 2021, the parking shortfall was funded partially by taxation, and that's the uptake of the $109,000 you see here, as well as the remaining shortfall needed was funded through the Special Initiatives Reserve. For project funding, so we are increasing to approximately $7.4 million from property taxation. So that's an increase in funding needed by $959,000. And this will bring us to funding levels based on what we had expected before the pandemic. So years 2023 to 2025, just as a note, the funding for those years increased $300,000 per year as we take on more assets and inflation. We've added a bit more to the funding each year. And our 20-year investment plan assumed a $7 million funding per year from the general revenue. And this is to help, as I say, close the gap that we have identified in our 20-year investment plan. So the RCMP contract, this includes 3 new members in 2022 with an April 1st start, plus any increase in the general contract costs. So we are billed 90% of the cost of the contract. The province pays 10. And from our budgeting perspective, we budget at 95% of this. Now, because historically we have never been at full, or rarely have ever been at full member capacity. So we err on that and try to save a bit of budget by only funding 95% of that. And we do have an RCMP contract reserve that has an amount, has a funding balance in there available if we go over that 95%.
Just a question on that, if I may, Your Worship. Does that include the anticipated salary negotiations that are ongoing, that are hopefully going to come to conclusion in the fall, so that we know what they are, as well as the request to bring us up to the same member per population as municipal police forces, which I think would make us have an increase of almost 25 to 30 members?
Right. So what we have done through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, we account for that it's not in the budget, but we do account for that, and we have a liability in our financial statements to cover that. It is an amount that E-Division gives us each year to, they advise us what that accrual should be. And hopefully it's better than the severance amount they gave us, because that was significantly more than what we had accrued. So we do account for it. It's just not in this RCMP contract amount.
Yeah, okay, because that's just my concern, because we're talking about salary increases normally from E-Division, but they're not looking at the request for the additional members that may be part of the contract, you know, to bring us up to the same standards as municipal police forces, which, doing my rough calculations, is close to 4 million. So that's what I was just wondering. Thank you.
So the next item is the recreation programs. So again, the assumption is that we're back to pre-pandemic environment in 2022, and therefore revenues and expenditures are increased accordingly. For software licenses, we have new licenses for the building permit software, as well as the Microsoft 365 software that come on board in 2022. And that's what represents that $235,000 increase. So transfer to the facility development reserve. So as we expect Parks, Rec and Culture revenues to increase back to pre-pandemic levels, so does the amount budgeted for this reserve contribution. So certain types of revenues from Parks, Rec and Culture include an amount to be transferred to the financial or the facility development reserve for future facility replacement or upgrades. So as revenues are expected to increase, so does the transfer to this reserve. VICC operations. So the assumption is that operations return back to pre-pandemic levels or somewhere near there. And as such, the revenues and expenditures increased accordingly. And waterfront walkway debt. So in the current 2021 to 2025 financial plan, borrowing for the waterfront walkway starts in the fall of 2021. But of course, before any borrowing can take place, electoral approval is needed. But this is still in the financial plan, our current one, and I'm sure there will be updates coming on this project. With regards to wages and benefits, contract increases as well as new positions account for most of this increase. The amount also includes a contingency for the IAFF contract, which expired in December 31st, 2019. Also, the use of temps and casual staff are back to normal levels as well. And all of those contribute to the just over $2.6 million for wages and benefits and some other small items. Next slide, please. Aquatics arenas, facility rental and recreation revenues are assumed to return to pre-pandemic levels, and these increases reflect that. Again, for casino revenues, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, casinos are assumed to be reopened, and staff target a 2-year recovery plan to get back to pre-pandemic revenue levels. So as a reminder, about 33% goes to the general revenue, and this remaining 67% goes to the strategic infrastructure reserve for funding of council initiatives. Recoveries for the Central Island Partnership, and that was FireCom. So as this partnership has been disclosed, the revenues have been adjusted accordingly in the current budget. So you'll see some funding, more funding required there. So the transfer from 911 reserve. So this reserve was used in 2021 to reduce the cost impact of the FireCom transition to the new contractor. And ongoing funds from this reserve will be used to offset fire dispatch costs in the future. So we get a call 911 levy from the phone providers for landlines, and this revenue goes in there, and we will use that to offset any costs associated with running that service. So the next one is the transfer from the General Financial Stability Reserve. So approximately 1.4 million was used from this reserve in 2021 to reduce taxes with no repayment required, as the reserve did not go below the minimum balance. So no funding was used in 2022, and that is why you see the funding needed here. So as that funding source dropped off, we have to pick it up through taxation. So transfer from the RCMP contract reserve. So starting in 2016, this reserve has been used to help fund the additional RCMP members that were added in that year. And 2021 was the last year of this funding assistance. So we gradually weaned ourselves off of that reserve, as well as this reserve in the new reserve policy is meant only for offsetting contract shortfall funding. So if we come in, if our contract for RCMP for the year is above the 95% that we budgeted for, that funding would come from this reserve. So that's the change there. The reserve was also used to transition the funding of the contract from 92% to 95%, and that ended in 2020. And as well as we used some funding for additional fleet vehicles in 2021 and 2022. So the transfer from the Special Initiatives Reserve, so we used an additional $400,000 from this reserve to reduce taxes in 2022. And that's part of that weaning off of reserve funding to reduce taxes. And again, growth is at our conservative estimate of 1.2 million. And all of that relates into a 3.6% tax increase.
Your Worship.
Oh, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. This may be just an accounting thing, or the question is, we're transferring from the General Financial Stability Reserve, or we're transferring back into that reserve of 1.4 million?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So in 2021, we used 1.4 million to reduce taxes. That is no longer a funding source in 2022. So we need to make up that funding through taxation, because we need a set amount of money to run the city for 2022. So this is just showing that property taxation now needs to cover that funding that was from the reserve in 2021. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just looking at the 400,000 from the Special Initiatives Reserve, which is the opposite. And couldn't they just they sort of cancel each other out, but we're just seeing them on. Yeah.
But because they come from two different reserves, we show it as two different lines. So really the net effect is $1 million less in reserve funding to reduce taxes in 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So the next slide is some other items to consider when going into the next budget cycle. Next slide, please. So we picked these three because they could come back later in the year and be part of increases to the future budgets. So economic development. So currently there is $300,000 in the budget for the new corporation. And this may or may not be sufficient for 2022. And as new and updated information is received, staff will update council on any changes in that. It's just a caveat to say that's what we have in the budget, but at this point, we're still developing that corporation, so there could be additional costs. The Community Clean Team. So this program was only extended to December 31st, 2021. And it is likely that staff will update council on this program later in 2021 if there is a desire to continue with it. So just for reference, in 2021, the budget was $248,300, and it was funded from the Special Initiatives Reserve. So this, if council chooses to continue this one, it could have a tax impact. And the last item is the Public Safety Action Plan. So this is the $50,000 in the 2021 budget to conduct a review or study of public safety. And this likely there will be some recommendations coming out of this review, and this could impact 2022 and future year budgets. At this point, we don't know because that work is ongoing, but that could come back for council consideration at a future date. Next slide, please. Slide. So project, so our funding sources, we're going to talk a bit more about project funding in the next slide. or in the next presentation, but here, the city funds operating and capital projects through these sources. So we have general revenue funding, which is our, for 2022, estimated at $7.4 million. And we have reserve funding through statutory and operating reserves. We do have some borrowing, and we have private contributions and grant that round out all of our funding sources. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the breakdown of project funding sources in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. So from reserves, this is our biggest funding source for projects, as 74% of all project funding comes from reserves. And that equates to about 261 million of our 354 million that is in the budget for the next 5 years. Debt funding is at 14% of funding sources for projects. And that includes both internal and external borrowing. So we have waterfront walkway, Wellcock secondary access, automated garbage trucks, and a sewer DC project, as well as 3 internal sewer projects that are all funded through debt. And we do have a bit, as in 1%, from grants and private contributions. So we have the grant for the turf fields at Harewood Centennial Park, and that project is contingent on a successful grant application. And we also have some private contributions from the Nanaimo Track and Field Club for track work at the Rotary Bowl, as well as the Soroxman Stadium Society contributed for the fencing project that is getting underway there. So that's just a quick recap of some of our funding sources. Next slide, please. When capital projects are discussed, these 4 projects are usually mentioned, and there are business cases and feasibility studies in progress for the RCMP detachment facility, the Nanaimo Operating Center, which is the Public Works Yard, and the South End Community Center. We have a recreation center, but I'm told it's community center. And these projects, along with the waterfront walkway currently in the financial plan, are all funded mostly from borrowing. And before we can borrow, as you know, we need electoral approval. And just a quick note on, just to give you some perspective on the cost of borrowing, based on current rates, which are fluctuating quite a bit lately, but if we took rates, current rates, $1 million in debt borrowing would equate into about $63,500 in annual funding costs. So that's about a 0.05% tax increase. So you take that and you can extrapolate that over many multi-million dollars of debt borrowing. So 10 million would equate to $635,000 in annual funding needed, and that's about a 0.5% tax increase if it's funded from taxation. Next slide, please. So while we're talking about debt, we'll talk about, next slide, please, the current debt that we have. So outstanding debt at December 31st, 2020. We have 2 borrowings for the VICC, and one pays out in 2026 and the other in 2027. And the debt repayment is funded from general taxation for this item. The water treatment plant also has 2 borrowings, and one pays out in 2033 and the other 2034. And this debt repayment is from water user fees. And the timing of the debt payout is quite advantageous, as we anticipate the new dam will be funded through borrowing, and the repayment of debt would be through water user fees. So as one funding, debt funding ends, another can begin depending on the time of the borrowing for the dam. For sanitation, there are 3 short-term borrowing, and one pays out in 2022, the other in 2023, and the third in 2025. And this debt repayment comes from garbage user fees. Fire station number 1, repayment comes from the general asset management reserve. So all of the internal borrowing relates to sewer projects, and repayment is funded through the sewer user fees. Next slide, please. So in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan, this is debt that we anticipate being needed in the next 5 years. So we have the fire hall borrowing continues into 2022, and this would be for this would make the total borrowing 16.7 million by 2022. The total project budget for that was just over $19.9 million. So the waterfront walkway project currently in the 10-year plan totals 37.8 million in borrowing. So there are these 5 years plus it extends into the 10-year plan as well. The Wellcock secondary access repayment will be from general taxation for this debt, and that is anticipated to start in 2023. Short-term borrowing for the new automated garbage truck will be undertaken in 2021 with repayment of the debt from garbage user fees. External borrowing for the DCC Long Lake Trunk project, which is a sewer project, is expected in 2023 and 2025. And for the internal borrowing, staff brings an internal borrowing resolution to council for approval, as that is best practice. So we've done that already this year for the Millstone Trunk South project, and we will bring forward one in 2022 and 2024 for the Millstone Trunk North project, and in 2023 and 2025 for the Metro Drive area project. Next slide, please. And this graph just shows the projected outstanding external balances over the next 5 years. Slide. So this chart graphically illustrates the outstanding external balances of the long-term debt over the next 30 plus years. So it includes borrowing in years 6 through 10 of the project plan for the waterfront walkway and the water supply dam. And as you see, the outstanding balance peaks in 2032 with the inclusion of the water supply dam anticipated coming on board in 2020 or 2031-32. Now the timing of that may be moved out. I'm not sure on that, but it is in the current plan. It is scheduled for 2021. This graph does not include borrowing for the RCMP detachment building, the Nanaimo Operations Center, or the South End Community Center. That information, as we get better costing on those and included into the budget, this chart will change at that point. Next slide, please. And this debt, or this graph shows that our debt servicing costs over the next 30 years as well. And again, it peaks in 2033 as the dam borrowing comes online in 2032. Slide, please. So under legislation, the city cannot borrow beyond its allowable limit. And at December 31st, 2020, the city's current limit is 46.5 million in annual debt servicing costs. Now, I would never recommend that we get to that level in annual debt servicing costs, but that is our maximum that we can have. As at December 31st, the city was at 11.61% of this current limit. Slide. Slide, please. So that is the very quick recap of where we're starting at for the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. So now what we're asking is council's input on this budget cycle, and is there any expectation on a tax increase target that council has or the committee has. And currently the draft budget will target 3.6 as that's what's been approved in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. But we will take direction from council if they want to see something different. We'd also like you to comment on if you have any specific priorities or focus areas. So this budget assumes that we've maintained current service levels, and that may require business cases to be generated to maintain those current service levels. It depends on departmental resources. And council also identified 5 priorities during your strategic dashboard sessions with Mr. Gord McIntosh. So at that time, you had identified priorities as the Reimagine Nanaimo, the Phase 2 engagement, protocol agreement working group, our public safety downtown options, as well as the health and housing transition plan, and the Nanaimo Port Authority were identified as your focus areas. So I'll turn it over to the committee to discuss any items.
Can I just ask a question? What is that bottom one, Nanaimo?
Prosperity Authority, which is the Economic Development Corporation.
Right,
So,
and are we actually calling it authority or so?
I
It's
think,
just a name.
yeah, it is called, I'm drawing a blank on what it's called now.
I think Nanaimo Prosperity, yeah.
Your
something
Worship,
incorporated.
Your Worship, if I can comment, that's under review. I mean, it all has to come back to council. It's my understanding, and Mr. Lindsay could speak more specifically, the process, the engagement process with the shareholders and stakeholders is underway. Council will be receiving a report on that sometime in the next, hopefully, month or two to get this launched. What it's called will be the outcome of that conversation.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I'm thinking long term and how we plan things out. And I was looking specifically at the debt servicing and the debt ratio graphs that we have. And I know that these estimates are done by professional staff. I'm totally on board with that and I appreciate the work that they're doing on this. My question though is, how long have we been doing this? And how did we make out if we started 20 years ago with those graphs today? And what I'm trying to wonder is, like, we made all these predictions 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They're probably in a graph somewhere. But due to grants from governments and various other things that have taken place, how accurate were we? And is that consistently, like, were we always underestimating by, X amount of percentage? Were we always overestimating by X amount of percentage? And if that is the case, can we then take that forward into the next 20-year plan? Have we ever looked at how well we did on these estimates? I guess that's my question.
Ms. Mercer.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. If I understand your question correct, so in the 20-year investment plan, is that what you're looking at? Like, how close are we to what we thought we would spend to what we did spend? Or is it you're specifically looking at debt? Just so I'm clear.
Well, it was sort of both of them. They're both long-term plans. And I was just kind of curious because we do this every year in that we have estimates, taxes are going to be this much. And then by the time we get into January, February, we're saying, oh, by the way, it's not quite that much. It looks like we now have another 600,000 or whatever, right? So I'm trying to think, does this work out for the same issue in our long-term planning? Are we always consistently conservative and we're always going to be less than or a little bit more than, that sort of thing?
Great. So for project planning, I can talk to that one a little bit first, is that the farther out in the plan you get, the less accurate those numbers are, because something that you costed today and you try to future cost that in the future, there is an element of error there. And as projects get closer in the plan, those numbers become more accurate. As we get up, sometimes we have unexpected changes that we weren't anticipating. Revenue drops, some revenue sources drop off, or some come in that we didn't anticipate. So basically, the budget is the best estimate we have currently that's conservative enough that appeases the conservative accountants in us. But I would have to look and do a comparison of what we expected versus what we actually ended up with. It's a bit of a shot in the dark for some things because we can only use the best information we have currently to anticipate what future costs are going to be. I'm not sure if that fully answered your question, but
it certainly answered my question, and I understand where you're coming from on this. I'm just curious, is over a long period of time, say 20, 30, 40 years, how consistently accurate are we? Always under, or are we always a little bit over? That's kind of what I was looking for.
And it's hard for me to give an answer because some are accurate, some projections are over in summer? And it's a really hard question to answer, but we could have a look at, we could look at targeted tax increases in previous years and see how we actually made out. I can provide that to council, just to see where we land, if that's something that you want to see for sure.
Tell you what, I'll hold off for a bit because I know you're busy. But it just, I'm curious is how well you've been doing basically in terms of these predictions. So.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bonner. I mean, the good news for me is that we're still below 12% of what we could be spending on interest, which points to a very fiscally conservative approach here. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is a question on debt as well. And it's probably, I don't see Mr. Sims, but maybe Mr. Rosen's covering for him. My understanding from and it could be completely incorrect understanding, from the water strategy is that with education and restrictions and things like that, that the environmental flow releases and the water supply is potentially good for another 20 years without the need for building a dam or building a bigger dam or a new dam. And so I'm just wondering if that's reflected in this debt servicing that I know the water supply dam starts off in 2030, I believe. So if I'm doing the year calculation between the two, it would seem that 2042 would when we'd potentially need to start, and that would fundamentally change this graph around how much debt we're carrying at a given year. I'm just wondering if, I guess my question is the work of the water strategy plan actually reflected in this debt graph?
I think Mr. Rosen is going to respond. Mr. Rosen, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. To answer that question, I think the graph was showing what's in the 2021 to 2025 plan. So since then, there's been, as Councillor Brown mentioned, there's been an update to the water supply modeling and so on, projecting that the dam won't be required for quite a bit longer than we had previously anticipated. So as we develop the 2022 to 26 plan, we will adjust the timeline of that required borrowing and so on. So I think, Laura, Ms. Mercer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would show that correction in a future debt graph.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the 2030s probably from a debt perspective don't look as bad as they aren't going to be as bad as they currently look.
Yeah, that's correct.
Anyone else? For what it's worth, Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'll just take the opportunity to give some general thoughts. Thank you, Ms. Mercer, for the presentation. I'm always amazed at the work our staff does in the finance department. I think my biggest takeaway from this is a sort of a veiled warning that this past year we took advantage quite liberally of our reserves to offset potential tax increases. And that is not sustainable over a longer term. And I think you referenced that we have $1 million less available this coming year from reserves. So I think the message to me is we're going to have to be very careful to stick to our knitting, stick to our priorities, make sure that basic services are provided. And I certainly would like to see service levels maintained. But I think we need to be very cautious as we move forward. And I think your starting point of 3.6 at this point to me is reasonable. I know it'll change in the months ahead, but from what you've presented to us this morning, I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
Obviously, things will change, and I don't see another hand, so I will say something now. My preference would be that we not end up with an increase at the end of the budgeting process of higher than 3%, and that includes the 1% asset management, simply because I think we have to be reasonable. Certainly the province has been stepping up to the plate in various areas, the federal government as well. Ultimately, I mean, the old line, which I don't really like that much, about what's all the same taxpayer, does become true. And our revenue source is mainly property taxation, which is not money that people have access to when they see an increase in value in their house, unless they've got a running line of credit and they want to rely on using up their equity. So I think it behooves us to take a more conservative approach. And for this reason as well, and council will correct me, my sense is that we have some necessary and ambitious projects in mind that will require long-term borrowing. I appreciate Councillor Brown reminding us that because of the good work of our staff and the very serious commitment made by the citizens of the city to reduce their water consumption, we have, I think, hopefully deferred for some period of time a very substantial expenditure. But at the same time, the waterfront walkway, the operations center, we have people working in basically grubby old portables out at Public Works. The South End Community Center, which has been talked about for a very long time. And you don't have to drive very far around the South End, Cinnabar, et cetera, to see how much growth there is there. These are ambitious projects, and that means that there will be necessary interest carrying charges coming into our budget over the longer haul. And I'd like to see us go into the potential of those projects being undertaken with as low taxation as we possibly can. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. A thought I just had, and I probably should know the answer, but I don't. With regard to the surprise, I'll call it a grant that we received from the province because of COVID issues. I think it was around 6 million or something, somewhere in there. How is that reflected in where we come up with the 3.6 tax increase for the following year? Because obviously the likelihood of getting another sweet surprise like that is probably not great.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. So the remaining balance, so all of that surplus from 2020 was put into the Special Initiatives Reserve, and there's about $3.7 million left in that from that money, and it sits in that reserve. We have used $800,000 from that reserve to reduce taxes in 2022. So currently, that's how much of that additional funding was used to reduce taxes in 2022.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown again, please.
Thanks, Your Worship. Like Councillor Thorpe, I think I'm fine with the 3.6 starting point. For me, though, it's really going to come down to just those questions around, are we adequately resourcing to match our ambitions? So, I try not to get too hung up on the percentage, because as we work through that, and I know that percentage does, it always stands out to people, but at the end of the day, I don't think it necessarily captures exactly the values of the organization or the values of the community. So for me, it's really about trying to implement that. I completely understand that we don't want to burden people with unnecessary taxes, so definitely not suggesting that. So I'm fine with that 3.6 starting point, but I am interested in conversations around these capital projects, because when I go through the budget and the reserves and available funding, I'm not maybe as conservative or as risk adverse as an accountant, but essentially, there's clearly $8 to $9 million that have zero risk to spend that is currently unallocated. From my perspective, with a little bit of risk, that goes way up. So when I think about the things around these capital projects, the stadium, Westwood Lake improvements, et cetera, I think it's time we get them done. So if there's some additional resources there that need to be, project manager or just additional engineering staff, I really want to have that conversation at the budget about making sure those capital projects are complete and we're delivering these for the community, because I think a lot of them are long overdue. They're going to impact a lot of people, and if not now, when? So we have the money to do these with essentially no risk. It's not putting us in a financially hard situation. So I know that's the next conversation, but I think it is linked to that number around staffing capacity and resources.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Mr. Rudolph, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just wanted to pick up on the theme of maintaining service levels. And Councillor Brown was reminding me about the relationship between capital and operating, because we often hear that comment, what is the extra operating costs associated with increased capital? Every time we have the good news about revenues from building activity in the city, the footprint of and those that increase our revenues, the flip side of that is it ultimately increases our costs to deliver services to those, which translates in the asks for additional resources. So we end up with more pipes and roads to maintain. Inevitably, we need more resources to manage that, more garbage trucks, more firefighters, because our population growth, all those things can be expected just to even maintain service levels normally. So, and then expectations are rising, and we saw that example, and maybe we're not maintaining adequate service levels in certain areas. One was the building permit area where we had that review this year, and we saw a need to invest more into that. So, it's really important to get council's views, and this principle of maintaining service levels is inherently means that there may be asks that come forward in business cases that suggest in order to maintain those service levels in certain areas, we do need resources deployed in certain locations. They may not just be staff, they may be software, that type of thing. So we will still endeavor to prepare business cases at an administrative level for your consideration this fall. And if council has any of those thoughts in terms of areas of particular interest, today's a preliminary chance to throw those out on the table as well. So, of course, you'll have chance in the fall with your detailed budget review process in addition. So I just wanted to mention the maintaining service levels as a principle is inherently means we have to grow the organization somehow, or our capacity as we grow as a city to now over 100,000 population. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rudolph. Other comments or questions from any members of council? Councillor Hemmons, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to Ms. Mercer's specific question, I'm comfortable with the 3.6. I'm very aware of any increases in capital are going to have to be matched with increases in operating. I think that's something that council is very aware of and comfortable with. In terms of service levels, obviously we need to keep them growing to meet the demand, but at this point, 3.6 seems reasonable to me. I think in a city that's growing and in a community that has unmet needs and growing unmet needs, 3% seems a little lean to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I see no further questions on this topic. So, Ms. Mercer, I don't know if we've given you as much direction, you, Ms. Legan, in your departments, et cetera, as much guidance as you would hope to have, but it's early days yet. So the next item would be the project planning overview. And Ms. Mercer, you're going to be doing that as well?
Yeah.
Please.
All right, so this presentation is a continuation of the project discussion from the May 10th GPC meeting that was held last week. And staff, took what we heard at that meeting and added some potential decision slides for the committee to consider. So next slide, please. So the agenda for this presentation is I'll go briefly over the project plan process overview. So we'll touch on some information relating to how we come up with our project plan. And I'll talk a bit about the potential gas tax bonus payment that we could receive this year. We'll talk a bit about projects that are currently in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan, and then projects that are not currently in that plan. And we'll speak a bit about capacity constraints, and then we have several slides for council discussion. And then we'll talk about the next steps in the budget cycle. So that's just a quick overview of how the PowerPoint presentation is laid out. Next slide, please. And next. So the planning of a budget is comprised of many pieces. So the asset management plan or the life cycle plans are maintained for each type of infrastructure. So for each type of infrastructure, so facilities, underground infrastructure, IT, parks, amenities, those kind of things, we have an asset management plan for each one of those types. And these plans outline the investment required over the next 20 years. And this information then feeds into these 10-year project plans. So we take that 20-year asset management plan and we then feed that information into the 10-year project plan. And each year, departments update their 10-year project plans. So within the existing resources, both operational and financial, departments must prioritize needed investment in infrastructure renewal, new infrastructure required due to growth, and new investment required to implement council's strategic plans. So, or priorities. The 5-year financial plan compiles these project plans and adds the annual operating needs to establish a plan to fund all of the city needs for the next 5 years. So there's many elements that layer on top of each other to come up with the final 5-year financial plan. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the breakdown by year for the different types of projects. Now it's a bit squishy, but what we've, for each year, the plan, it breaks out the percentage of the different types of projects. So water, transportation, drainage, sewer projects, parks, etc. So 23% or $81.5 million of the budget in the next 5 years is spent on transportation infrastructure. So projects such as Metro Drive Phase 2 and the Terminal Corridor are included in this transportation bucket. So 22% or $76.3 million is for water infrastructure. So the Midtown water supply upgrade is probably, I believe it is the biggest project in the water bucket. We also have the Towers Reservoir upgrade and the meter replacement program that are included in there as examples of some of those items as well. So a significant portion of the parks investment is tied to the waterfront walkway and in the 5-year plan, as well as the Harewood Centennial Park artificial turf field is also included in the parks bucket as well. So those are just some of the highlighted bigger projects that are in these buckets over the next 5 years. And the total investment in projects over the next 5 years is approximately $354 million. So it's made up of many different types of projects. Next slide, please. So this graph shows how the 2021 project plan for the general fund is broken down into the different categories of projects. So what we find is 58.6% of the projects in the 2021 project plan are related to renewal. So more than half of our project plan in 2021 relates to renewal. 28.4% relates to new or upgraded projects. So those two are the biggest categories within the project plan. And DCCs at 6.6%, strategic projects at 5.1%, and plans and studies rounded out at 1.3%. So the blue graph off to the right is concurrent projects. Now these are projects that can create more than one type of asset. So if we have a roads project that has maybe a sidewalk portion, some upgrading of water and sewer infrastructure, a bike lane or pathway, and all of those relate to one project, we call them concurrent projects, and they result in a number of different types of assets. And that makes up approximately 28.5% of the overall budget for 2021. So that's just some statistics of just to give you an idea of how that project plan is made up. So again, more than 50% is related to renewal of assets we already have. Next slide. So we already went through this slide in the previous presentation, so I won't go through the information again. But the takeaway from this slide is that 74% of project funding in the 5-year plan comes from reserves. So reserves are our biggest funding source by far when it comes to project funding. Slide, please. So this slide is from our April 2017-2020 or the 20-year investment plan that was presented. So communities build and maintain infrastructure to provide services. That's exactly what we do. And using a robust asset management approach directly supports sustainable service delivery. And that's the goal of our 20-year investment plan, is to sustainably deliver service. So in the spring of 2017, staff presented the first 20-year infrastructure investment plan that included both renewal and growth needs. So this slide represents the big picture of how our funding needs measure up against our average available funding for each year. So some years were under and some years were over, but the asset management plans are not perfect, and they are based on best information and assumptions available at the time. And so the purpose is to direct attention and to support proactive decision making. And the investment plan allows us to make proactive changes on how to mitigate any future issues. And it also helps provide, it also drives the project planning process. So since 2017, the city has continued to move forward. So in 2018, a new DCC bylaw was approved. A governance framework was completed and council adopted an asset management policy and a strategic asset management plan. And currently there is an RFP underway for the corporate asset management system that will help us move this forward. So an update to the asset management plan and the 20-year plan is underway, and it's expected to be presented to council in the spring of 2022. So we will take the information that we had at 2017 and update it, and we'll come back to see how we've done at shrinking that funding gap that we identified in 2017. Next slide, please. So per the 20-year investment plan, the city was to invest at least $7 million per year from general revenue. And to date, only 2020 was were we successful in doing that. The 2022 contribution is budgeted to be approximately $7.4 million. And as I mentioned earlier, in years 2022 to 2025, the general revenue funding is increased by $300,000 per year. Next slide, please. So this chart displays the projected ending balances of each reserve type graphically. So we've taken all our different types of reserves and put them in a graph form for you. So on reserves, they may look flush, but the vast majority is accounted for in plans or regulations. So there are some reserves that have unaccounted for funds, but these funds are limited. So things like the DCC or the development cost charges, that is very restrictive as to what we can spend it on. So when you boil it down and you take out minimum balances in water and sewer reserves, and you take out DCC reserves, you're left with a small amount of reserves that is really available to fund projects that may come up that aren't renewal. Next slide, please. So these are some general reserves that can be used to fund projects. So many of the reserves used to fund projects have a very defined criteria, and normally these are outlined in a bylaw. And on the types of projects that can be funded. So like I mentioned, the DCC funds, those can only be used to fund projects outlined in the DCC bylaw. So there isn't a lot of room in there to use that as a general funding source. So this chart shows the projected closing balances for 6 reserves, which are generally used to fund projects with less defined criteria. So there's more room to use this funding to fund any additional projects. So I'll go through each one and highlight the available unallocated amounts in each one of them. So the first one is the General Capital Reserve. So we have approximately $1.6 million in available funding in this reserve. And this reserve has contributions from surplus. So there's no regular contributions, just occasionally we'll put money in a general reserve to fund unexpected projects that come up in the future. The Special Initiatives Reserve has just over $3.7 million in it. And again, that was left over from the 2020 surplus. And again, there's no regular contributions to this reserve, and contributions come from allocations of surplus. The Strategic Initiative Reserve has approximately $400,000 in unallocated funding. So this reserve, as you know, is funded through annual casino and Fortis revenues. So currently, the casinos are closed, so we do not have any money from that source coming into the reserve. And the reserve also has a minimum balance of $320,000. And annual funding that does come out of this reserve, we have $300,000 currently for pedestrian unallocated projects, and we have $600,000 a year for land purchases. So those are in the budget throughout all the years of the financial plan. And what's left over is approximately $400,000 that hasn't been attributed to any specific project.
I have a question on that, please.
Sure.
Please.
So as I indicated at our last meeting, I'm very interested in increasing our pedestrians up to 1 million. So would that come out of this existing, or would we have to look at taxation for that?
We are going to talk about that in a slide in the future, in a slide coming up.
Okay.
But it is, once casino comes back online, that is a funding source for increasing funding for pedestrian unallocated. But Mr. Rosen will talk to that in an upcoming slide.
Thank
so we'll
you.
have more information. Okay. The next one is the Casino Reserve. So this is a bit of a legacy reserve. We used to allocate our casino revenues to this reserve before we started allocating it between general revenue and the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. And so there's no longer any regular contributions into this reserve. And once we use up all the funding in this reserve, we'll close the reserve account. So there is just over $426,000 available in unallocated funding in this reserve. The Community Works Fund, I will talk a bit more about this in the next slide. This reserve has annual contributions from the gas tax revenue. And like I said, I'll talk about this more in the next slide, but our current agreement or contract ends in 2023. So in the financial plan, that revenue stops in 2023. So with the potential additional funding and the unallocated funding available in the reserve currently, we have just a bit over $4.9 million available to be used to fund projects in this reserve. And the last one is the General Asset Management Reserve. And we have approximately $1.8 million in unallocated funding in this reserve. And annual budgeted contributions come from our annual asset management reserve contributions, and that includes the 1% increase in taxes each year. And this reserve does have a minimum balance of about $3.5 million, but we do have $1.8 million approximately in unallocated money in that. So, well, staff do not recommend spending all of the reserves available in these funds, as we are still in a pandemic environment, and it is good practice to keep funds available to react to unexpected projects that may come up. Now, having said that, if there are a few projects that that the committee would like to see completed, these funding sources are available.
Ms. Mercer, Councillor Brown has a question.
Yep.
Thanks, Your Worship. Sorry, I just wanted to be clear. Does that 4.9 million of unallocated in the community work funds include the 1-year top up? I just wasn't sure.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and the other question I had is over the next to the end of the projected life of the community work funds, but I think they will obviously get a renewed contract. What is the total amount of unallocated in comparison to the revenue coming in and expenditures out?
We have about it's just a little under $1 million currently in unallocated. It's 900 and some odd thousand dollars.
Okay, so that's unallocated over the next projected 4 years. Yes. Or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Next slide. So in March of this year, the federal government announced that it intended to top up the gas tax fund allocations to local governments. So if Bill C-25 passes, and that's the bill that this funding is in, if it passes, local governments would effectively see a doubling of their 2020 funding. So what this means for the city of Nanaimo is that we could expect an additional $4,041,138 in funding through the Community Works Fund in 2021. So there is an information report included in the agenda today, and it gives a bit of history on the gas tax revenue funding. As well, included in the report is a listing of potential projects that council can consider funding using this bonus revenue. So all of the projects listed in that report are included in this presentation in later slides. So you'll hear more about those projects in later slides, but they are potentially able to be funded through the Community Works Fund. Next slide, please. And one more, please. So these are projects that are currently in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. So I'll start with corporate services. So some of the major projects in corporate services are the Enterprise Document and Records Management System, or the EDRMS project, and that is underway in 2021. The Enterprise Resource Planning Software, or the ERP software, which is our financial software, is coming to end of life, and we need to upgrade it or replace our system. And that comes online in 2022 and 2023 for funding. And the Corporate Asset Management System, or CAMS, is implemented over 2021 to 2024. So this is the acronym slide, and there'll be a test later to see if you guys all remembered what those are. But these are some bigger projects that are in the plan with regards to project, community service project, or corporate services, sorry. I need to better eyes today. Okay, next slide, please. And next one. So the next 3 slides are a recap of what you saw last week in the presentation on capital that Engineering and Public Works gave, as well as Parks, Rec, and Culture. So I won't go through any great detail of these slides, as they are a recap of what you heard last week. So this is a list of projects that are planned for 2021 or are already under construction. Next slide, please. These projects are in the 2022 budget and to be started in 2022. Next slide. And lastly, these are projects in the 2023 year of the plan and are scheduled to start then. Next slide. Parks, Rec, and Culture. Next slide, please. So this is a recap of what you were presented with last week with regards to Parks, Rec, and Culture projects. And most of these projects relate to 2021, although a couple stretch into future years as well, such as the Nanaimo Search and Rescue Building, which is in the Harewood Activity Center, and that's 2021 and 2022. And the Waterfront Walkway starts in the plan in 2021 and goes out to 2030. In the plan, but dependent on a successful grant application, is the artificial turf field at Harewood Centennial. For years 2021 to 2022, and it is in the plan, and it will continue to be in the plan unless we are unsuccessful with the grant application. Next slide, please.
Your Worship, if I may, just a question on that. Thanks, Ms. Mercer. One thing I was just wondering is, in some of those projects where they're, the community work funds have been earmarked to fund them or portions of them, the number that you gave, 4.9 million, does that account for that sort of earmarking?
So sorry, with the artificial turf field plan, is that?
Yeah, so that would be one example.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the money is sort of earmarked for that, and then there'd be an additional question if the grant didn't come through. But
that's right.
But right now, that $4.9 million excludes the money that's sort of been allocated for that.
Yeah, the total project for that is the 4.9, and the city's contribution in the budget is just over $1 million, I believe, and the remaining is in the budget as a grant. But if we don't receive that, then we have to come back to council to decide if that is something that you want to carry forward with.
Can
Thank
I just,
you so much.
Sorry to interrupt, it's Wendy. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Tyler Brown's question. The funding for our share of the artificial turf field, you've actually funded that from your strategic infrastructure reserve. It's not funded from the community works fund, just to be clear on that.
Okay, so the question there though is those numbers that were given to us previously and potentially available funds include the money that's been allocated to these projects that might be contingent upon a grant, but that question makes sense?
Yes, so
okay.
Wherever we have a project where the city had to commit funds as part of the grant application, we've included the city's commitment in the financial plan, and it's reflected in all the reserve balances.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the clarity.
Thank you.
Flagan has a question.
I just wanted to clarify Councillor Brown's question. I'm understanding your question is the 4.9 million in the Community Works Fund, as described by Ms. Mercer, unallocated, actually unencumbered and allocated for any project going forward?
And that is correct. Yes, it is.
Thank you. So thank you. Then that's the clarity I needed, and I assume that's the case for every single one of those numbers given around the.
That is correct.
Fund. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So now I'll briefly go through some projects that are not currently in the plan. So we'll start with Public Works, Engineering and Public Works. So these are two projects relating to active transportation that are not in the current plan, but could be. The Lenhart Bridge, which you received a report on last week, could be added to the budget in 2022 to 2026. And the cost is estimated at $237,000. And potential funding sources for this project are the General Asset Management Reserve, as it is a replacement. We also have the Community Works Fund, the Casino Reserve, and the Special Initiatives Reserve that could fund that cost as well. The Buttertubs Bridge is another active transportation project that is not in the budget, but could be. The costing for the Buttertubs Bridge needs to be updated. The current estimate was $500,000. However, this is more than enough funding for a functional design or feasibility study to determine final concept, but that funding cost would need to be updated. Next slide, please. So projects not in the plan relating to Parks, Rec and Culture. So we have some stadium improvements. And again, there's a report attached to this agenda that goes into more detail about each one of these items. And the total cost of all of these improvements is approximately $2.5 million. And potential funding sources are the Community Works Fund, Casino Reserve, and the Special Initiatives Reserve. Now, two items. So the future phases conceptual design and the temporary washrooms and change rooms will likely not be eligible for Community Works funding, as the criteria for a Community Works project must result in a fixed asset. So as temporary washrooms wouldn't qualify for that. And the conceptual design may result in an asset, but it may not. So we wouldn't recommend funding that from the Community Works funds. But there are other, as I've identified, there's other reserves where that could be funded from.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Why would we do temporary washrooms and change rooms?
I will let Mr. Harding or Mr. Groot answer that question.
Thank you, Chair, to Councillor Martman. If you remember, we came to council to say we're going to do a complete implementation plan for the stadium district, but particularly the medium-sized stadium. The one aspect that will probably be a larger capital project will be the washrooms and change rooms. But we still have a number of years that we know that there's events that want to go on. So this is one, if we want to move a lot of events there and open it up for some events, like for example, the Night Owls next year, the Raiders this year, we may need some to bring in something temporary to facilitate the change rooms for the athletes and increase washrooms for the spectators. It's not the perfect world aspect, but we know in reality, if we were going to put those events on, we're going to have to have something there. So it's the one that we don't have as much detail on at the moment, but it's something we wanted to put in to show if we want to start these events out of the pandemic and move some of the other groups to this area, we're going to need some amenities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer.
Alrighty, so the next item is the Westwood Lake Park amenity improvements. And again, there is a report attached to this agenda that talks more to this potential project. And the estimated costs are $750,000 to $1 million. And potential funding sources are the Community Works Fund or the Special Initiatives Reserve. And the last project that is identified here is the Marie Davidson BMX track improvements. So the estimated costs for this are 1.1 to 1.5 million. And again, potential funding sources are the Community Works Fund or the Special Initiatives Reserve. Next slide, please. So the RCMP detachment facility, the Nanaimo Operating Center or the Public Works Yard, and the South End Community Center have business plans and or feasibility studies underway in 2021. So costing will be forthcoming for those projects. And borrowing would be the expected funding source for these projects. The waterfront walkway that is currently in the plan would require funding through borrowing as well. So those a decision in the near future will be made on how to move forward with these 4 large projects. These 3 are not in the current plan, and the waterfront walkway is, but they all need borrowing as a funding source, so a decision will need to be made at some point on those. The costing for the fire training center renewal and the fire headquarters retrofit projects need final costing completed, but these could be funded from the general asset management reserve as they are renewal or upgrade projects. And any future...
Councillor Timmins has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Ms. Mercer. Perhaps a silly question. Does debt servicing always come from taxation?
No. Depends. So like any water, say the new dam that we would build in potentially sometime in the 2030, 2040 would come from user fees for water. Any garbage sanitation trucks, that would be funded through garbage user fees. So currently the fire station number 1 is funded through the general asset management reserve, as that is an upgrade to that facility. So, and it doesn't impact taxes. Several do, but not all of them do.
Okay, and reasonably that asset management reserve fund would be the one that we primarily pull from for debt servicing.
We could, yes. So potentially for the Nanaimo Operations Center, that debt could potentially be funded through the General Asset Management Reserve, depending on what kind of funding levels we have in there. But that is kind of identified for that. A South End Community Center would likely not be, because it's a new facility, and the General Asset Management Reserve is meant for renewal or upgrading of existing assets. So there is, and that would kind of go with the RCMP detachment facility as well. So there's still some looking at those, but there are a couple of different funding sources for those.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bonner, your image popped up on the screen with your yellow hand raised. Did you have a question?
No, Your Worship, it was just answered.
Thank you. Very good. Well done, Ms. Mercer. You're anticipating them now.
I know, I'm on a roll today. So the costing for the Fire Training Center renewal and the Fire Headquarters retrofit projects need final costing completed, but could be funded from the General Asset Management Reserve as they are renewal or upgraded projects. So any future fire station build projects would need to be funded through borrowing, like the city has done for Fire Station number 1 and number 4. And we don't, that's, you know, a future discussion, but it is, that discussion comes up every so often, and there is nothing in the plan for that. Next slide.
Your worship?
Go.
Sorry.
Councillor Bonner.
Yes, you just inspired me again. Sorry.
Darn it.
So yeah, is specifically to the police station. If we build a police station somewhere else than where it is now, is that a new building or an upgrade to? Could that be funded out of the General Asset Management Reserve?
It would be likely be considered a new building, so likely not General Asset Management, but that is something we'll look at when we get into discussions about funding it.
And just out of curiosity, who makes that decision?
We look at the reserves, and then we do have finance generally makes that determination. But it depends on what we do with that building. Whether if we add on for growth, then that isn't a funding source that we can use from there. It is how we determine that. So we'll look at that closer to the date, but likely it'll be a general taxation increase funding.
And you're making, it's your recommendation, but is council the one who makes the final decision, I'm guessing?
Generally, we go by what the bylaw says we can use that for. And if it's determined that it's a new or growth, then that the bylaw requires that we couldn't fund it from there. Ultimately, council, I guess, could change the bylaw requirements, but that would be our recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
We'll talk a little bit about capacity considerations that the city has to contend with. So our first one is funding. So we have a finite amount of funding sources available. So projects often have to be prioritized to be funded in the project plans. The most critical are funded earlier in the plan, and the others are spread out over the 10-year plan. So we look at the criticalness or the criticalness of the project, and we determine kind of where we can fit that in the funding of the plan. Staffing is the second consideration. So we have a finite amount of internal staffing to manage and complete project work that is required. So the city may have funding for a project, but not have any staff capacity available to complete the work. So again, the projects may be staggered throughout the project plan to work based on staffing level needs. So we could have the funding, but we may not have any staffing to do it. And the third type of capacity is for contractors. So in the current construction market, it's booming, and therefore a number of qualified contractors available to do the work may be limited. So Parks, Rec, and Culture can often get a project underway more quickly than engineering and public works can. And this is due to engineering and public works projects being more complex in nature, as they have to consider all potential infrastructure improvements. So for example, if they're doing a road, do they look at, do the sidewalks, what is the life of the sidewalks or the infrastructure underneath the road, and where it's located in the city? There's a whole bunch of considerations that are more complex than the Parks, Rec, and Culture projects are. So Parks, Rec, and Culture can bundle their projects more easily, and work can get underway more quickly, and they may have more availability of contractors depending on the type of work that is required for the project. So those are all capacity considerations that we deal with when trying to build our project plans. So each of the council discussion slides will speak to any potential capacity limits that we see that might impede the project. Next slide.
I was going to suggest, Ms. Mercer, it's 10:34. We're scheduled for recess at 10:30. Maybe it's the appropriate time to take the break now.
It could be a good time to take a break.
Thank you very much. And if you've left your hand up from previous discussion, if you could make sure you take an electronic hand down, thank you. So we'll reconvene at 10:50. Give everybody 15 minutes, or is 10 enough? 15 it is.
15.
15. We'll see you back here promptly because we're just going to roll. And if we're all here, and I think we are. Ms. Snellgrove, good to go. Ms. Mercer, please carry on.
All right. So the next few slides are ones that council could consider adding to the project plan review for the 2022 to 2026 financial plan cycle, or move forward in our current financial plan. So while we can't do all of the projects listed in the upcoming slides in the next year or two, there is an opportunity to add a couple of them that council would really like to see completed. We could look at incorporating the remaining ones that you are interested in years further out in the plan. So Mr. Rosen is here to discuss the first few slides as they relate to public works and engineering. And then Mr. Harding and Mr. Groot will discuss the next slides that relate to parks, rec, and culture. And then I'll come back and do a bit of a recap on the slides. And then staff will go through all of the slides, and then we'll come back and revisit them individually once we're done that. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Rosen.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. So we've put several slides forward for council's consideration based on what we heard at the May 10th discussion. These are slides that we felt council wanted to hear a little bit more about. This particular slide is related to the pedestrian unallocated fund. Now, that fund was initially set up a number of years ago, and the purpose behind it really was to deal with reactive projects that, because normally our project planning cycle involves at least a few years. Like normally a project will be put into the capital plan potentially 3, 4, or 5 years out. And as we sort of get closer to it, we develop concept designs and detailed designs, and we set, reliable budgets, and we can set the staff resources up to be able to deliver those projects. That long project cycle doesn't always lend itself well to reacting to concerns the community has, or issues that are sort of need to be more timely, dealt with in a more timely way. So that's why this fund was set up the way it was, and that would give council the opportunity to deal with these issues in a given year. The downside to this, and Ms. Mercer sort of alluded to this a few slides ago when she talked about staff capacity and different types of projects. The types of projects that we do, this pedestrian unallocated, it tends to be smaller type of projects, and these smaller projects, they tend to draw a disproportionately large amount of staff time compared to a much larger project we could package up and assign it to a consultant and so on. I guess another way to think of it is economy of scale is not in our favor with these types of projects. So council, it sounds like council might be interested in increasing the annual funding for this particular program. There would be different ways to do this. I mean, the way we've done it in the past is we've had like an annual amount that sort of repeats itself every year. It's kind of a bit of a predictable thing. That would be one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it would be to create like a one-time increase. So like 2022, for example, could be like a one-time increase. That would have less of an impact on staffing. But one of the things that we could, I mean, this is speaking to the motion, and we can deal with this after you've looked at all the slides. But we could come forward with a business case that would outline a number of options for council to consider if there was interest in increasing the funding to, for example, $1 million a year for this program. So I'm going to move to the next slide unless there's some particular questions about that. Okay. So connectivity projects. So another thing that we heard from council on May 10th was a lot of interest or concern around connectivity. Now, there's different definitions for connectivity. The way we think of connectivity is we've got the infrastructure that we have right now, but then we also have this infrastructure that we're aspiring to. And in this case, it could be from the Transportation Master Plan, or it will come out of the Active Transportation Plan and Reimagine that we're currently in the process of developing. But the connectivity is really the gap between those two things, right? So the gap between what we have and really what the community aspires to. Now, the reason this is a little bit complex is because we know now what the Transportation Master Plan has in it in terms of the network that we aspire to. But what we aspire to as part of the Active Transportation Plan and how those priorities fall out, we don't know that yet. I mean, that's something that we're going to get involved with, and council's going to be involved with as we go forward throughout the rest of the year and as we develop Reimagine. So it's a little bit of a moving target right now. But we know there's a couple of projects or potential projects that fall into this category of connectivity, and we put them in front of council on May 10th. And that one of them is the Lenhart Bridge, which council already asked staff to put in the budget for consideration. And then the Buttertubs Bridge, really that's one of the connections that will be required to establish the off-Bowen bikeway. It's a fairly important strategic link between what we have and what we aspire to. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I put this map in here, and the two circles show both the Lenhart Bridge and the Buttertubs Bridge and Trailway link. And it shows how this is a map. What we've created for, it's really a staff tool is what we've created. It's a GIS application, and we have, in terms of layer and line work, all the existing pedestrian and cycling network the city has. And then we've also overlaid on top of this all the aspirational routes and line work and layers. So that's the green line. So this is just a static screenshot that I'm showing you from this tool that we have, that we've been using, and we continue to improve it to be able to identify gaps and connections and priorities and so on. And just as a bit of a side note, if council were interested in finding out more about this particular GIS application, we could provision it for council to get in there and have a look at their particular area of concern, see what we've got in terms of cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, look at what the aspirational layers show, and then that would be able to, you'd be able to see sort of what the connectivity gaps are of interest. So if council is interested in that, certainly could provision that out for council. But just wanted to show where those two projects kind of fit into the connectivity realm. And there'll be much more to talk about in terms of connectivity as part of active transportation master plan. But this is what we can show at this point in time. Next slide, please. Yeah, Mr. Harding, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosen, the chair and the council. So some of these we gave you a primer for last week at the GPC, and so later on in your agenda, there's also a more detailed report on what we're now kind of coining the stadium district. And I just before I go into these interim projects, council gave us direction a number of months ago to start working with user groups and other key stakeholders of developing a comprehensive implementation plan for the stadium, the medium-sized stadium, which is now currently NDSS community field. And then with that, though, looking at how we can incorporate the other areas of the sports zone into it. So I won't go through each one of these, but these are aspects so that we see as we're doing the detailed improvement plan, the overall build out for the stadium district. These are some key amenities that we could do in the next little bit that will facilitate, for example, the Raiders are really excited now that the council's designated NDSS as a stadium. They want to move their games from Caledonia over to this area as soon as possible, and that could be as early as this fall. And of course, we know the Night Owls weren't able to do their season this year, but coming in next year. And of course, if VIU soccer can get out, high school football uses this facility a lot. So these are all amenities that would facilitate an interim improvements and things that could last, except for possibility of the temporary washroom change rooms. And if there's any questions on particularly on this one, we can do it now, or we'll go through the overall presentation. Again, there's a more detailed report on council's agenda today. Next slide. And this is just as we're just starting to work through the concept, this is the area that we're talking about. And I think we introduced it to you last week, creating a common courtyard, entranceway, seating over to the one side of all three venues so that public washrooms, food services could all be in one corner, as well as other amenities that we need. The safety fencing for all three venues if we do create a plaza location so that you could have 2 or 3 activities going on, and then the activities wouldn't impact each other. For example, foul balls going into the either the medium-sized stadium or track and field. Next slide. Rotary Bowl, so this is another one. This is an example where we could move forward. We're doing some work this year, and it's a project that you could move forward and have done. This is in addition to the other work that we're doing on the medium-sized stadium and the other work. We'd only recommend this one though is if we did the safety fencing that's proposed in the medium size. So the real main benefit here is that there'd be less disruption. We do have it planned for 2024 prior to if we're successful getting the BC Summer Games. So again, this isn't something we can quickly do, but I wouldn't recommend it unless we do some of the other stadium improvements to make multiple uses happen at the same time. Next slide. Ms. Mercer mentioned this to you. Again, we're hopeful that in mid to late June, we'll hear about the grant. If that grant is not successful, it's a project, again, that'll be at the design stage and something we can relatively quickly react to or build. We're doing user group consultation now on the design, and it's one of those projects again that's will be ready to go, and we could do in a short period of time. Next slide. Again, we also have a detailed report on for you today, and again, my apologies for late, but we wanted to make sure you understood where we're at with Westwood Lake amenities, and we have again some draft design. Council gave us $50,000 last year to start some conceptual designs. We're at a stage now that we'd like to go out and test that with the public and get some more feedback. So we still need to do that over June, July, and August, and then come back. But again, it's a project that we think we could phase in doing one part of the amenities, do that, open that up, close the other part of the park. And again, we can talk more about the details of this project during that report. And if I'm going too fast or slow, let me know here. Next slide. If council members last year we provided us funding to work with the BMX Association to come up with a detailed design to redo the track. Of course, the track's been there for many, many years, very popular, but it's dated. There's some safety issues to make it current. And the club, we've been working with the club. Mr. Groot can offer any more details on where we're at with the design. We do think this would be a great project to work with the association, which will also have some contributors to it. It's a project that, although it would be shutting down the park for a period of time, something again we can do in the next 18 months. Next slide. And again, with the success of the first phase of Inclusive Playground, we're excited about getting going on the second phase. It's one, again, that we believe that we can move forward on, reaching out again to the same stakeholders like the Child Development Group and others, and get that design done. The draft is kind of there already, and how it links both to the existing playground and Rotary Garden. There's some real opportunities there. Again, we still need to do some design and some costing, but it's a project that can be done. There is a grant in for this one too, but I don't believe we'll know about that till later on. It's something though that if we are successful with the grant, we can always add more to a playground. It's very easy to add more to it. It's usually we're taking away because of the costs. So it's something we could add to the scope of the project, maybe add a feature that we couldn't afford with the other portion. Next slide. Long Lake Paddling and Rowing, Council's given us direction to go out and do public engagement with the draft now. So we'll do that through June, July, and August again, similar to Westwood, and then come back to you on some what the public's saying and maybe some changes to the scope of the project and design of the project. Again, though, if that comes back in the fall, we do believe it's something we can get to the design stage and tender stage and at least started in 2022, if not finished in 2022. Next slide. And that's it for me. If there's any questions for me specifically, or if we've decided to wait till the end, that's fine.
Okay, so the next two slides are just a summary of all of the slides that Mr. Rosen and Mr. Harding described, and it lists the project, the potential cost, the high and low range, and as well as potential funding sources. So I'm just debating whether we should go back and just talk to each one of the slides, and I can talk to that at that point, or I can go over these briefly now. We've broken the decision slides in the summary sheets into two categories. So we summarize the possible additions to the 2022 to 2026 financial plan and summary of the possible changes to the current 2021 to 2025 financial plan, because there are some considerations in each one. So I think what we'll do is I'll just jump back to slide 30 and we can talk about the individual projects, potential projects for inclusion.
And if I may ask a question at the start, Ms. Mercer, just to be clear, these projects are recommended very quickly, in summary, to come out of reserves and very few out of taxation.
Yes. Yes.
But do we have an idea that, say, we approved all of them, will that, taking it out of reserves, reduce us to a point where those reserves have to be built up again? And if so, what are the implications of that? I'm just looking for a fairly general comment. I'm not asking you to give me a dollar amount or anything like that.
Right. So we couldn't fund all of the projects in the next couple of years. We would have to, if you wanted to do all of it, we would have to look at spreading that out over the 10-year project plan based on staffing and funding requirements. And yeah, so it's potentially, it could be all from reserves, but we wouldn't know that until we started placing each one in the plan. We could certainly do a couple of projects with and still have adequate reserves, but not for all of them. And we would have to somehow build back up reserves, so we would have some funding available to meet unexpected project needs that come up.
I will temper my desires accordingly. Thank you. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Mercer. Is there, can you give us a dollar figure in terms of the reserves that we can't drop below before triggering a tax increase in 2023?
So
or 2022, pardon me.
I'm just flipping back to slide. So the slide on the general reserves, and I gave you those balances. The balances available in those 6 reserves that I outlined is that that's the funding that's available to be used. So if you used all of that up, then the only real funding source would be taxation.
But at some point, we dip into our reserves to a point that we trigger a repayment that's going to require us to tax next year. So what is our threshold in those reserves until we trigger a tax increase next year?
So overall, sorry, I don't. You have about $12.8 million worth of unallocated reserve funding that could be used potentially. So once you've maxed that out, that's when we would start, then we would have to use taxation.
Okay, and then one more, if I may, Your Worship, a follow-up. Some of the motions I see identify that if we include this in the draft budget or the draft financial plan for council consideration. Yes. The Roxman Stadium improvements didn't have that language. And I just want to make sure if I move that, I'm not locking us into further conversation about that project.
Right. So with the stadium improvements, or the stadium district development ones, those, Mr. Harding would like to move those forward into the 2021-22 years of our current financial plan, and that to coincide with, work that's ongoing there now, and get those that area up for use for the activities he listed. So that's a little bit different than we would still. It's a bit different because we would be amending our current financial plan. We could change it, but you would really be locking yourself into that one.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Armstrong. You got to unmute yourself, Councillor.
Yeah, I wanted to make a motion on the unallocated pedestrian funding if it's appropriate now.
And what were you, Councillor Hemmons raised your hand.
Pardon?
Councillor Hemmons, you raised your hand as well?
Well, I assumed that Cheryl was moving the recommended motion and I was seconding it.
No, I'm not. I have a different one.
Oh, okay. Pardon me.
And what were you thinking, Councillor?
Okay, that 700,000 of community work funds be allocated in the 2022 budget for pedestrian projects. That would bring the total of 2020 amount to 1 million, as 300 is already in the 300K is already in the unallocated pedestrian fund.
And you're seconded, Councillor Hemmons? And we are, after all, and I want to keep this in mind, just so we're clear, we're not voting to spend the money this morning. We're just recommend that council direct staff to include in the plan.
That's correct.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong, do you want to speak to it at all before I go to Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, one example that comes to mind right now is we've got the new subsidized apartments being built on Brecken, and there's opportunities I think that could be done there. I mean, there's no crosswalk that takes the kids to the school there. So I think that's something that we really need to look at. We could do it in line with that. So I'd like to see the dollar amount up for that. So I'm just saying that as an example, but I do think, I mean, everybody walks. Not everybody drives a car, not everybody can ride a bike, but everybody can walk for the most part, or, you know, use wheelchairs. So I'd like to see more emphasis put on that type of infrastructure. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Brown, then Martman, and then Hemmons.
Thanks, 100%. Thanks, Your Worship. 100% support this. I think really seeing what staff did with the increased funding just this year alone, really, I think it's the right move to make. There's clearly a strong desire for this from the community. And so I think all in all, as we start to do a little bit of repair work and sprawl repair work, this is a little bit of money that can go a long way in certain neighborhoods and the people that live there's lives. So happy to support this. And I'm hoping over time, I noticed that if this is approved, these are both one-time top-ups, but I think as we move forward, I think we need to start looking at some structural changes to how these type of funding gets allocated, and similar to the asset management function where we see an increase over several years to make some sustainable funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you to Councillor Armstrong, can you reread what your motion was again?
Okay. That 700,000 of community work funds be allocated in the 2022 budget for pedestrian projects. That would bring the total in 2022 amount to 1 million, as we already have 300K in the allocated pedestrian fund.
Thank you. I'm wondering why you didn't want to move the prepare a business case for $1 million on annual funding.
Because I wanted to get this rolling now, and then we can look at that for future.
Okay, thank you.
Because we have the money now, so in the unallocated, and then look at that. I mean, I'm more than willing to make that as well, or you can. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Worship. Going back to this and echoing Councillor Brown, really seeing what staff can do with kind of an influx of cash into a department around a specific initiative. I would encourage, as we go through these, if there are staffing resources required to match the strategic direction that council is giving, that staff bring that forward for consideration in tandem with these, or at the appropriate time. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that as we make some of these bigger and bolder moves, I fully expect staff requests for extra staffing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mr. Rudolph before I go to Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. In explaining this motion, the way it was explained to me, and you're looking at two different approaches here. One is a one-time injection, and looking at topping it up to $1 million. That's the nature of this motion, and that it would be if you want to sustain that in a more permanent way. There was a suggestion in this that there will be a resourcing implication. So the engineering department, the nature of the motion in front of you would have been raising the 300 to 1 million as a standing line item in your budgets. In the way this is now being prepared, it's a one-time initiative subject to, and then there would be further review of that. The difference between what the 500,000 and the 1 million, as it's been explained to me, and Mr. Rosen can speak to this, is we believe we have the capacity within our existing staffing to go up to 500,000 because these are resource intensive projects. We don't have that capacity to go to 1 million all in. So we're going to have to either submit a business case for more resourcing. That was the nature of the second part of this motion, or look at some temporary approach. So it may be easier to do it as a one time, but if we're going to have a sustained $1 million, then you would need an additional resource, and we are anticipating submitting that to you as part of this fall's budget process. So I just wanted to explain the motion a little bit for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Thorpe and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supporting this, and my point of view is that well, first of all, as I look ahead through the slides we've been discussing or going to discuss, I mean, there are many of these projects I'd love to support, and not all of them, but we can't do everything. However, my feeling is that pedestrian funding should be more of a priority for us. I'm not sure that I would support the 1 million annually, but I definitely would like to see us do a one-time increase as Councillor Armstrong is suggesting. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Thorpe's comments very much reflect my own. I think, we do need to take this seriously, and we need to get to it. We are doing it a line item, and I appreciate that recommendation from staff, but just sort of acknowledging that this year we're also still sort of like in the payback mode for some of what we did with the reserves to lower down taxes and things like that. I think it's probably appropriate that we look at ways to do the funding increase and take advantage of some of our reserves and additional funding we've received from senior levels of government while trying to keep that tax rate in what we discussed previously is what council sort of deemed as appropriate. So that's why I'm supportive of this one-time thing, but I appreciate the staff recommendation there, and I think that's where we need to go, if not this year, in some subsequent years.
Thank you very much. I would ask all of you to take your hands down if you have had your say, so to speak. Is there any further discussion from anyone? Seeing none. All those can't see the whole screen. That's the problem. So if we can
IT stop the screen share for a moment, please. Then you'll be able to see everyone.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any further questions. The motion's in front of us. All those in favor? And any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And I'm wondering if it's appropriate to the motion. There was a recommended motion around the business case. Mr. Rudolph, simple question is, do you need direction from council to go ahead and prepare a business case? In other words, should we have that second part of the motion?
Your Worship, it's at council's discussion. We can certainly build a business case around that, and you can take a look at it as part of the fall submission for consideration. I mean, one of the things about this is staff will have to go back and establish a method to achieve the aspiration for next year. But in terms of a sustained piece, we could certainly look at that. We will have to address this resourcing. So I don't know if Mr. Rosen can speak to that more specifically or not. I defer to him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just with respect to council's, the motion here, the one-time top-up will, the staff resources to deliver that will depend entirely on what type of project or projects are chosen for that. So as we normally do, we'll bring a report to council with a number of recommendations. If council chooses to do, like, for example, one big sidewalk project, that's a completely different resource draw than if we choose to do 30 or 40, intersection upgrades or something, right? So I think as part of the budget process, we will go and have a look and see what projects we're going to recommend for that. And we'll put in front of council what the staff resource requirements are for the various options there as part of the budget process. But as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, if this is going to be an annual program, there'll likely be some significant staffing resource implications there that we would build as part of a business case if council wanted to go down that road.
So no motion today, but maybe a motion later. Is that fair comment? Mr. Rose?
Yes, Your Worship, I just wanted to clarify, if I may. Obviously, council will need to see a list of projects that are candidates to fit in with the $1 million funding envelope, and you will have to choose which ones you want to do, and staff will come back with so we'll have to have a workshop on that, I would suspect, and that'll be fine, and maybe we'll do a preliminary one and then lead to something more specific. So it's organized. So there's definitely work to be done there, and one of the things that council indicated as part of last year's budget review process, you wanted an opportunity early on to get involved in some of that. And I think this is an area that was particularly of interest to you. So I believe that staff can put before you a longer list of candidate projects or packages for your consideration that would help inform staff going forward in more detail. That would be the most efficient way to do this. So defer to engineering ultimately to arrive at a timing on that, but sooner the better, because it does take time to get resources determined, and how does that impact other projects. So I think we'll commit to come back to you with more information on this, and it might be a couple of steps, and certainly wait to the fall would be too late. We need to get going sooner than that. So I would anticipate a July, or I'll defer to Mr. Rosen, but we'll certainly endeavor to come back sooner with more information on this and unpack it for you. And that'll be helpful for staff, of course, as well, to know that.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Rosen and then Councillor Armstrong, who's been waiting.
So historically, with the allocation of the unallocated pedestrian funding, we bring a report to council sort of in Q1 or Q2 of the budget year. In this particular case, as Mr. Rudolph alluded to, it would be much more advantageous to balancing the staffing and the resources if we were to do that sooner rather than in the budget year. So what we could do is we could bring a report sooner, like it could potentially be this summer or the fall, with this list of potential projects that would get delivered if the budget gets approved. So rather than actually allocating it, it could be these are the ones that we're focusing on. That would allow staff to start working on those projects earlier rather than waiting potentially 6 months to get them started. So I think that would probably be the approach that I would recommend, is that we would come definitely a lot sooner than we normally would.
Thanks, Mr. Rosen. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I was just going to say, I will definitely be asking for the request for the business case next year. I think this year I'd like to see us get rolling on this, and we're still in a COVID year. We're not sure where the recovery is going to be for our citizens. And if we do increase our to $1 million, that will have a small impact on taxes. So I think this year we can deal with what I was looking for, and then next year really seriously look at the increase. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mercer, shall we carry on?
We shall. So the next slide is connectivity projects. And so the Lenhart Bridge is already part of the 2022 to 2026 financial plan consideration, as council made that motion, or the a motion was made at the GPC meeting last week to do that. So the one we would be looking at here is, would the committee like to see the Buttertubs Bridge included in the project deliberations for the draft, in the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan?
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move that motion.
And do we have a seconder? Councillor Armstrong? Any discussion on this from anyone? Again, you can just use your voice, and as opposed to having staff bounce back and forth all the time to go to the screen. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm kind of curious, given the expense of that particular infrastructure, what the difference in cost would be to utilize the existing bridge on Bowen Road. In other words, expanding it compared to a new bridge over Buttertubs.
Mr. Rosen.
Your Worship, to Councillor Turley. That's a great question. There would be quite a big challenge to attach something to that existing quarterway bridge. Likely, if that was the desired location, we would build an independent structure, probably upstream of the existing quarterway bridge. But there's some significant property challenges and so on there. The other issue is it doesn't necessarily, the existing quarterway bridge doesn't line up with the desire lines of the pedestrians and the cyclists. So that's why this particular location on between sort of Fuller and Buttertubs would be quite advantageous. There actually is an existing multi-use crossing on the quarterway bridge. It's on the I guess the east or the downstream side of the bridge. And if we have the off-Bowen bikeway, running north-south along that alignment, most folks aren't going to want to kind of go all the way around and then back.
All right, Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Worship. Just both to reiterate the very same thing that Ms. Rosen just said. It's a rather difficult part of the Bowen Road to maneuver on a bike. And so the ability to avoid it completely, I think, warrants the bridge there. And the bridge is going where the bike paths are coming out. So I think it's a good place for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, as I said before, I look at these slides and want to do all of these things. And I admit I'm on the fence on this one. It's not one of my personal priorities. I'd like to see it done. I guess I'd be willing to support moving it forward for consideration. But it doesn't rank in the top of my priority project. So in supporting this, Councillor Bonner, I'm sure you'll return the favor and support the ones that I put forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe. I would regard that is that Councillor Bonner, is that an offering of a rose or a shot across the bow? I'm not sure.
It's an offering of a rose, Your Worship, as long as I support the things he puts forward.
Very good. Mr. Rosen, you wanted to comment.
Just wanted to provide council with a bit of a cautionary note on the $500,000 that was put into the plan. As all projects start as just ideas, this one is not a very mature project. This is a very early. It's really just a little bit beyond an idea and stuff at this point. One thing that we could do is we could, instead of adding $500,000 to the plan, we could add a much smaller number. And that would allow us to develop the project a little bit further, develop some pre-design, functional design, that kind of thing. And that way we would be able to set a budget for a future year with a lot more confidence. So if council wanted to, instead of allocating $500,000, we could allocate, say, $75,000 or $100,000 to move the project forward. So just throwing that out there, and we can include that in the, if council directs us with this motion, we can include that smaller amount in the capital plan, but we probably wouldn't include the construction unless council directed us to.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. I will be supporting this. So I take the advice of Mr. Rosen there, but I believe the intention of these project lists was potentially things that could be accelerated. So that's why we'll vote for the 500K. And if there's some refinement that needs to happen, then obviously we'll consider it then. So I'm fully in support of the 500K and trying to move this one along. So I think it's an important piece of infrastructure, and I'm looking forward to some of the other ones put forward too, because I think there's a lot of community impact that can be happening in a short period of time with this list of projects, both rec and connectivity ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further speakers, the motion's been seconded. All those in favor? Any contrary? Councillor Turley, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Mercer?
So can you flip forward 2 slides, please? So this is the Stadium District Development slide, and there is approximately $2.5 million worth of improvements to the stadiums and identified here. And the motion is to direct staff to include the stadium improvement projects in the 2021 and 22 of the current financial plan. And that's different than the previous one. Is we would actually be adding this to our current 2 years of our plan and get that work underway.
Thank you. In order, Councillors Brown, Hemmons, and Armstrong, I think.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would actually just like to move the motion. If there's a seconder, I'll speak to it.
All right, seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Go ahead,
Thanks,
please.
Thanks, Your Worship. I've connected with quite a few of the different user groups that would be impacted by this project, and I think this type of project really benefits multiple sporting user groups, which are large communities, and that's great to see that direct support for them as well. But more importantly, I think being spectators and being able to be a spectator of sport is something that even those that aren't playing sports, but in the community, they can go watch their kids, their grandkids, taking a ball game when we get the team up and running, and optimistic that'll be next year. So I think yes, it does have a bigger ticket price tag, but I think the community benefit per dollar here is really, really high. And so I'm very happy to hopefully move that motion, and I hope that the committee supports it because I think it will have a long-term positive impact. Thanks.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Echoing Councillor Brown's comments, this one, it's a big investment, but the potential impact for these developments are significant for the community. And I think in particular for our community, but also for the potential for sports tourism and the recovery after COVID. I think with our new hotels coming in, we're hopefully going to make stronger and better bids for those out of, kind of interprovincial tournaments or interregional, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is great infrastructure for both the community and for those who want to visit. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong, I see your hands down. I take it you're happy with what Councillor Hemmons had to say. And seeing no one else, I must say Councillor Hemmons expressed what I have expressed before myself around sports tourism and trying to crawl out of COVID and the economic recovery potential. So this is wonderful. So seeing no further speakers, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Mercer?
Through the chair to the committee, we will divvy up the funding sources between Community Works Fund and the Special Initiatives Reserve based on the type of project. So just to clarify for that one.
Councillor Brown?
Thanks. That triggered a question that I did have for staff earlier, and I hope you don't mind it now, is as we select these projects, I'm just, obviously there's going to be stacking rules around potential grants and things like that. And so I'm just wondering, as we think about, the puzzle, the jigsaw puzzle of piecing together funding for these. Will we be looking at, hey, this might be really eligible for a grant, so we'll, it might make sense to fund it from the Special Initiatives Reserve rather than community work funds to, not run up against stacking rules or something like that.
Yes, and that is all considered as grants become available, and that can change based on future grants that we do receive. We try to juggle around the funding sources to potentially meet that if we can. So
perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Snellgrove.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out that this motion that Council just passed is the same as the one listed under Agenda Item 7C. So when we get to that item, we won't need to make the motion again.
Thank you. And Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick thing is, I know we're building infrastructure to support sports tourism. In terms of the capacity question is, how are we promoting sports tourism to come here in town? And I'm not expecting this conversation now, but I think it's something we need to talk about in the near future.
Mr. Chair, if I could answer that for Councillor Bonner.
Please.
So we actually, one of the GPCs coming up in June and maybe July, but we have a draft sports tourism strategy, Councillor Bonner, that we'll bring forward and present to you, as well as some of the other initiatives that we're doing generally with events and the culture and events area. We'll also like to do a GPC on the same day on that as we're coming out of the pandemic and how we're trying to promote and encourage these types of things, as well as, we're working on a new governance model for tourism Nanaimo. That also will be coming back to you around the same time, showing how we could unite a variety of tourism organizations together to market and promote the city.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Ms. Mercer?
thank you. So the next item is the Rotary Bowl, the track and field. And this motion is to move the oval track upgrade from year 2024 to 2021 in the current 2021 to 2025 financial plan.
Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And not to repeat myself, but I'm going to. And just for the record, this slide and the 5 slides that follow it are all projects that I would love to see completed and as soon as possible. But through you, if I may, to Mr. Harding, what I heard him say, I believe earlier, was that this project would actually be better served to wait a while until some fencing gets done and other things are completed. So I'm not going to move this motion presently. It might be premature on this project, but I would appreciate Mr. Harding's clarification. Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Councillor Thorpe. I'll ask Mr. Groot to add into this. The main benefit of doing it now is that we only have 1 year of disruption to the track and field club. However, the track, because we have some repairs that are going ahead this year that need to be repaired, but the overall replacement of the track is in the budget for 2024. It's not needed to do it right now. So it's here, but there's a number of projects that we've put in front of you that we also would like to get moving on. And so it's more, if Mr. Groot can maybe answer just quickly, the priority of doing it now, but I believe it's just it's this disruption opportunity versus it needs to be done right now.
Mr. Groot.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you. Yeah, so it really comes down to expediting that replacement of the oval to match up with the replacement of the 8-lane sprint track this year, just to avoid any kind of seasonal disruption in 2024 for groups and the community that have now had kind of 2 years in one after the other of interruptions for completely different reasons, but it will be a significant interruption to the use. But Mr. Harding is absolutely correct. It can wait from a replacement perspective until 2024 as planned.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong.
Is there any cost benefits if we do the 2 together, or will it not matter?
Mr. Groot.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Armstrong, you're correct. There are cost savings in bulking the two phases together. There's one, on-site mobilization. We're not sure what future year inflation looks like. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. There is a cost savings to do it in one calendar year.
So, Your Worship, with that, I'd like to move the recommended motion.
Very good. Do we have a seconder?
It's not.
Councillor Martman. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? The Mayor, Councillor Armstrong, and Councillor Martman, and those opposed? Councillors Turley, Brown, Hemmens, and Bonner. Motion is defeated. We're not going around this track. Ms. Mercer.
Okay. So the next item is the artificial turf field at Harewood Centennial. So the motion here, or the option here, is to direct staff to include the artificial turf field project at Harewood Centennial Park in the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council consideration if the grant is unsuccessful. So we won't know. So we applied for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program under the Community, Culture and Recreation Infrastructure stream. And we won't know whether we were successful with this grant until the summer of this year. And so the grant that we applied for is approximately $3.3 million. So if we are unsuccessful, then what we're looking for is direction to try to include this into the project plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff. So if this motion is defeated, is there a likelihood that that would impact the decision of the federal government about making the grant to it? In other words, is it going to, they know about it, and B, if they do, are they going to think, well, it's not that big a deal?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley, we do have it currently in the financial plan. So I believe that is enough of a commitment to show that council wants to go through with it. From the grant perspective, Ms. Fulla can jump in if she has more information on that. But at this time, I don't think that would affect the grant.
Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanted to recall or remind council, when we did the stadium development report to designate the medium-sized stadium, one of the things I did add to that was, with moving more of the major games and events to NDSS Community Stadium, is that demand for more turf fields. So staff would be recommending, regardless of how we do with the funding, that this is a key project to move forward to provide capacity for a variety of sports that may be displaced out of the stadium area for practices and other games.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation, and I'll speak to it if seconded.
Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Martman. Please, Councillor Armstrong.
I think this is really important, especially if we are looking at sports tourism. A lot of places won't come here. Like I know when we had the BC senior high school football about 3 or 4 years ago, we had to go to Ladysmith because we did not have the capacity for fields. So I think it's really important that we have another artificial turf field here. So for me, it's one of my priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. In order, Councillors Brown, Hemmens, and Martman.
Thanks, Your Worship. Very supportive of the project, but I actually won't be supporting it at this time, as we do have that grant application in. And I know obviously there's always ongoing conversations with our partners. So I think there's some multiple variables there that could see this project realized independent of any accelerated funding. And so looking at the potential project list and where some of our money could go, and knowing that there may be opportunities through potential partners or the grant funding, I think there's maybe some high likelihood this project can get completed in a good amount of time through some other means. So I'm not willing to support this at this time.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar comments to Councillor Brown. I'm curious to see the outcome of the funding application before designating money for this. Obviously see the value though.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and I seconded the motion, and I understand the importance, but again, I would like to see where our grant application gets and then be able to make our decisions from there. Thank you.
Thank you, and just being a little bit contrary here, all we're asking is that staff include it in the financial plan for consideration. And we're not being asked to make a final or formal decision today, and I appreciate the comments of some members of council, but I am going to support it on the basis that this isn't the final decision. And I think it emphasizes for me the importance of this project for a whole series of reasons that Mr. Harding and staff and others have outlined in previous discussions around this. And most particularly, perhaps I'll try and phrase my remarks delicately, the south end of this community is often felt neglected for a number of reasons historically. This particular school has demonstrated an incredible success in, I think, promoting the health of our youth with their sports programs at that school. So for that reason, I will be supporting it. And I see Councillor Armstrong again, and then Councillor Thorpe.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo your comments. I mean, if you read it, it's if the grant application is unsuccessful. I think this is a really important thing for the community, as you stated. I also think if we want to be seen as sports tourism and we want to get kids out doing stuff, more and more when you look at the BC high school sports and stuff, they're requiring artificial turf to even compete in some of these. And right now we only have NDSS. So I'm very concerned about the ability for our students to compete. So for me, this is very important. Just wanted to throw that out. I mean, it is only dependent upon if we don't get the grant. Thank you.
And Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I really appreciate the comments of earlier councillors regarding the status of the grant funding, and I appreciate that. To me, this is an important project, and I'm willing to support this for the reason that I think, Your Worship, you just pointed out. This is not the final decision. This is simply to include it as we move forward, and if we get more information between now and then, we can change our course. So I'm prepared to accept including this for consideration at a future date, and then we can make a more informed decision perhaps then. Thank you.
In order, Councillors Turley, Martman, and Brown. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a correction on a statement Councillor Armstrong made, that the NDSS field is the only artificial turf in Nanaimo. There are two other artificial turfs at Evan Park, and I look at this project as a want to have versus a must have, and so at this point in time I can't support it. Thank you.
And Councillor Martman.
I'm in listening to the conversation and realizing we're at the beginning of this process and how important really this is. I've changed my mind and I'm just saying I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Brown.
Thanks. I fear that maybe we're losing the spirit or the intention of today. If we're literally going to support everything, it makes none of this planning. Like I just say, screw it. I'll see you guys in the fall and we'll discuss it all then. I think the point is to set some clear intentions here. And, you know, if people want to support one project or another, I'm all fine with that. That's the point of the discussions. And some I'll support and some I won't. But if we're literally just going to say, oh, I just want to advance this so we get it back to us in the fall, you know, then we're wasting our time, we're wasting staff's time, and we're not showing any seriousness to how we consider these projects. So I just flag that as a concern because it's just, you know, and the point here is, I think, to give some clear direction to staff, knowing that there is going to be some variables. Undoubtedly, if the grant doesn't come through, this particular project will come back to us for consideration. But I think, you know, available projects to available funding is something like 150%, and that would be completely draining the reserves we talked about. So we can't do it all. I think we need to signal clearly to staff that we are serious about others and how we weighed and considered it, and so they can move forward with some advanced project planning, because business planning takes time, project development takes time, and crafting a budget that all works together takes time. And so I don't want to waste people's time by oversubscribing to our available funds. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong.
This will be my last comment. I just did want to recognize what Councillor Turley said, but not all sports can take place at those events. So I should have clarified that, or at those fields. And secondly, this was identified by Mr. Harding, as we just heard him, that this was a priority for his staff. So I think they know what the community needs and wants are. So therefore, that's the other reason that I'm supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman, you don't wish to speak again. You just left your hand up, correct?
No, I do wish to speak.
Oh, sorry, pardon me.
I just wanted, in reference to Councillor Brown, even if we did approve all of this, I think it's still a good process, because I think that staff knows us pretty well and has put projects in here that they would like to see and we would like to see. But I don't see it as a waste of time, even if we asked for all of it, because it's the beginning of the process. And what would happen is, if there was an item on here that we all went, why is this on the list? We don't want it at all, then that would give them clear direction. So I do look at this as good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further speakers, the motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Councillors Martman, Mayor Crow, Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Thorpe, and those opposed? Councillors Turley, Brown, and Hemmens and Bonner. At a tie, I believe the motion is defeated. Correct, Ms. Snellgrove?
Yes.
Very good. Next one, Ms. Mercer, please.
All right, we're on to the Westwood Lake Park amenities. So as Mr. Harding indicated, there is a report that accompanies this project in the agenda, but the potential motion on the table is that council directs staff to include the Westwood Lake Park amenities project in the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council consideration.
Councillor Hemmens and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move the motion.
And do we have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Hemmens, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of return on investment, I think this one is a clear winner. Westwood Lake is seeing more use every year. It's also a key in terms of sports tourism with the growing mountain bike community, and this one I'm very strongly in favor of, and I hope you'll support it. Thank you.
And Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Thorpe.
I do have a question on process. So we've got reports coming up on these later. If we've already approved them, why do we need the reports later? Like, to me, we should have been doing the reports and then doing that. So I just think if we've already approved it, why do we have to get the report? So it's a process question.
Ms. Mercer or Ms. Snellgrove?
I think the intent was to provide background information for each of these slides. We did struggle a bit with which one we put first, but the idea was to provide further background to the slides in this presentation deck.
So just to add that then, if we've already, because we all do read our documents, we've already seen it, so there's really no need to go over them after if we've already voted on them. It's kind of redundant. So we can just eliminate them.
7C is off the list already.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have to say, I think Councillor Armstrong makes a good point, and personally, this is one of the projects that I know the least about, except anecdotally from the community. And in fact, that's the reason that I requested a GPC meeting to discuss issues related to Westwood and our facilities there. So maybe we should have done that first if it had been possible. But I know that I've heard enough from the community that, as Councillor Hemmons, I think, mentioned, this is a key recreational facility, and I think improvements are needed there badly. So I'm going to support moving this forward. Thank you.
I think it's fair. It's being loved to death. Going to go to Ms. Snellgrove and then Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Mr. Harding to provide some insight because the recommendations in this PowerPoint presentation is different than the report. So they do have different implications. So maybe he could expand on that.
Mr. Harding, please.
Thank you very much.
Lake in the background.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, I apologize, Council, for the lateness of this report on finance and audit. So we're going to bring it to you later at a GPC and go through it more in detail. But what we're really looking with the report later on today is outline some of the initial concept drawings we've done. If Council recall, they gave us 50,000 last year to start looking at some concept drawings, particularly on the first beach area with those key amenities, those key gateway amenities to the overall park area. And so what we're doing on that, what we'd like to see with introducing Council is the draft concepts, which are really just pieces of different amenities that we want to go out and engage with the public over the summer again. Again, Westwood is busy all year round, but it's particularly busy, even more so throughout the summer. So we want to do some engagement with the public there, as also rolling in what we heard from phase 1, reimagine engagement, and also included in phase 2, reimagine engagement, which is also going to happen over the summer months. So all that being said, it's a timely for us to go and get that input from the public, and then come back in the fall with a more detailed designs and input from what the public has said. And what I mentioned in there is that we do have the washroom building in there as part of the design component, but that's not the washroom building, the new washroom building, accessible washroom building isn't in this budget package, other than we can do the detailed design. I was going to mention that when we got to the report.
Okay, any further questions? And we've got the motion in front of us. All those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Ms. Mercer?
Thank you. The next one is the Marie Davidson BMX track improvements. And just as a note, the motion in this there's an error in it. It shouldn't say Westwood Lake Park Communities. It should say Marie Davidson BMX track improvements be included in the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council consideration. Doesn't matter how many times you look at all these slides, there's always one that slips through. So I apologize for that one.
Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one feels a little bit like a Hail Mary, but I'm going to move the motion.
Councillor Armstrong, you're seconding. Councillor Hemmons, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Your Worship. This park and this area has seen a lot of improvements the last number of years, and that BMX track is really the last remaining piece. It's beloved by many families in the community, and I think if anyone is unfamiliar, I would suggest you go past the new amenities in that part of Bevan Park, and it's packed every day after school on a sunny day. So again, like Westwood Lake, I see this as a strong return on investment. Thank you.
In order, Councillors Armstrong, Martman, and Brown.
I agree with Councillor Hemmons. I think this is really important. It's something that doesn't matter what your financial level is, most people can take advantage of. So it's really important because it just basically costs a bike, and a lot of kids are getting their bikes for free if they can't afford it. So I think this is really important. And the second part I really like about this is that there is potential private contribution. So the club itself is trying to help by doing that. So I'm very much in support.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman.
I just had to add, as a personal note, avid BMXer was my son, and I noted that a lot of children are not always for the group sports teams or can afford it. And this was an opportunity for children to individually still participate in sport, but only count on themselves for how they perform. And it's just used so much. It was 20 years ago, and it's even more so today. This, to me, is one of our jewels in our city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to vote for this in favor of this for the same reason voted for the Sir Oxman Stadium. I think it's really great what has been supported to date, and I hope that carries through because the funding is there. And personally, I'm going to support any staffing complement to see these things through because these projects are long overdue, and seeing completed projects in the community, not a bit here and then a bit here 2-3 years later, to me really shows the maturity of the city as we start to move forward. And I think, just frankly, I think our citizens deserve these amenities, and I love seeing these complete packages on the table and coming together. So very happy to support this, even though you'll never catch me on any of those hills.
Mr. Hardy, you want to add something before I go to Councillor Bonner?
Just wanted to add quickly, Council, that we appreciate all the comments here, and it is an incredible place, and it's also one of those venues that when the club isn't using it, it is open to the general public, and they've allowed that for all the years that they've been there, so it is open while the club's not doing practices or events. And further, we will be bringing back a more detailed report to you on this design and how we see us moving forward if it is selected. Well, either way, we'll be bringing it back, but we'll definitely be bringing it back sooner than later.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. At the risk of gilding the dead horse, I'm going to also vote in favor of this. And one of the reasons I'm quite interested in is because it's another piece of sports that we can add to our repertoire of attracting sports tourism to our area, especially if it's larger competitions and BC Summer Games, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. And if everyone's going to gild the dead horse, as you phrase it, let me just say that as someone who met Marie Davidson not long after I came to town to article, and I'm conscious of all of the lives of many young people that she literally saved in her good work, this is a perfectly appropriate project for council to support. So all those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Ms. Snellgrove, I note we're at 12:05, but if council has an appetite and staff is available, and unless I see objection or concern, we need to keep plowing through, if that's all right. Mr.
Yes.
Lindsay, you popped up. Is there a signal here? No? All right.
I was going to suggest, Chair, if needed, we could take a 5-minute recess or we could continue on up to council.
I think they want to push on unless someone's desperate to make it to the bathroom. All right. Let's push on. Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you. Well, we're almost done. So the next slide is the Maffeo Sutton Park Inclusive Playground. So the motion, potential motion that's in front of you is that council directs staff to accelerate the Maffeo Sutton Park Inclusive Playground Phase 2 project to 2022 in the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council consideration. Currently, it is in the year 2023 of our current plan for $663,300.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I would like to move the motion as recommended.
And seconded by Councillor Armstrong.
And I just want to say this is an fabulous addition, and yes, let's go on it.
Any other speakers? Well, I'm very tempted to say, in light of Councillor Brown's earlier remarks, that given that we've put a great deal of money into this recently, and we should be discriminating around these projects, I may just vote for it just to be contrary, so we'll at least prove we're having a discussion here. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just want to note, although we have approved a lot, we are still less than $7.5 million, which by my math here, so we're okay. Some of the big ticket items didn't advance. So,
well, I'm very comforted by the fact there's still room on the Visa. So, or as I used to generally say, well, the MasterCard will charge it to the master.
This is the savings account, Your Worship.
Yes, I know. Well, I've always had lots of rich friends who say they have no money, and that's because it's tied up in term deposits. All right, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, so last but not least is the Long Lake Paddling and Rowing Center. So the potential motion in front of you is that to direct staff to include the Long Lake Paddling and Rowing Center, including park improvements and playground upgrades, to the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan for council consideration.
Do I have any questions? Councillor Armstrong? Sorry, you're muted, Councillor. Are you moving it?
Yeah, move the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Thorpe, seconded. Discussion on this one. Councillor Armstrong? No?
Yeah, this is another one that's been promised for many years. We've already got the designs done. I think it's really important. And again, it goes to what Councillor Martin said about individual sports. Some of this is individual, some is teams. But I think it's something that's really needed and really, really important in the community. You spoke about the South End saying you don't have a lot, but when you look at the North End, they have far less than anything, and Central really doesn't have anything. So I think it's really important that this go through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Worship. I unfortunately am not going to support this. I think I've been a bit lukewarm on this project simply because I'm not convinced that it serves a wide swath of our community. I find it quite specialized. And in terms of, Mr. Harding made a really good point about the BMX park is open to everyone all of the time, no matter you're a BMX member or not. This amenity seems very specific, which it's been in the works for a long time and it would be much loved by that community, but I'm not convinced that it's an amenity that serves our broader community.
Councillor Armstrong.
I would say that Long Lake is used a lot in the summertime and there's a lot of people that are out fishing. So I think the washing facilities are really critical to get those in there and get them up to code. So for me, I think, and as well as having the meeting room is also very important. There's very little up in that end of town. And I think it's something that we need to really look at. So for me, I think it's a really important thing. It's been in the works, like you said, for quite a while. And I would really like to see it happen.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. Question through to staff here. So taking the high end estimates of what's been approved, we're at, I think, which is 66% of available reserves, which that we talked about, which doesn't seem too outrageous. I'm just curious, accelerating some of those projects, does that potentially unlock other funds that may have been allocated to them from other sources? You know, I'm thinking some of the rec or stadium improvements that obviously would have been budgeted for some parts of them anyways into the future. Are those funds then becoming available to maybe fund something like the paddling center, at least in part?
Through the chair to Councillor Brown. So for things like, which one did we say for the, which one did we do? Maffeo Sutton Park, that project, we move it forward, but the funding comes with it. So there wouldn't be any additional funding for that particular one, as it is already funded from the Community Works Fund. But when Ms. Fulla does the financial plan, when she tries to fund everything, there could be some things that are moved around to free up funding from sources that may work better based on the things that we're adding here today. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does, in the sense that I think, you know, some more work is required. So
yes. Yeah.
On that note, I'm going to support this, noting that, you know, the high end estimates 4.5 do put us well over. They would completely deplete those reserves as we talked about, yes. But I'm hopeful that it'll come together that it is possible through some of those other funding sources. If not, I think council will have to make some tough choices on a couple of these projects. So, but I'm optimistic some magic might happen.
We should always be optimistic and hopeful. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I'm hoping that Councillor Thorpe doesn't call in his chit on this one. I'm not going to support this one, not because I don't want to see the building built. I've said this many times, but I believe that if a relationship and a partnership was made with Indigenous organizations who are willing to do this, that a tremendous amount of funding to build this building can be made available through the federal government. And so to put it into our budget now without really trying to go down that road, I think, I know we're not putting it in our budget now, but to really, without looking down that pathway, I think it is a bit of a mistake. There's literally millions of dollars available to build this thing from other funding sources.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to clarify on this project as well, I'm sure we're all aware, but there are 3 groups that are going to be partnering in this project, similar to the BMX track. So I think if we don't support this, we're sending a message to groups within the community that even though they're willing to participate in fundraising for it, the city may or may not decide they want to go along that route. I think I agree that this is a project that has been beneficial to lots of people. If anybody's gone there during the summer to swim, the washrooms are in dire need of improvement. I believe that there's also been part of the project is in improving the playground there as well, which I stretch. The only place that's closer is, I think, one across the highway at the at what used to be the Mountain View School or Benson View School. I forget what the name of it was, but there's nothing else in the area east of the highway that in any proximity that represents a playground. So that's an added bonus of this project. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to let Councillor Bonner know that it's okay. I won't hold you to your promise, and I won't call in my chit. Maybe another day. I will support this, and I don't think I can agree with Councillor Hemmons in her assessment. I think for me, this is as much about park and playground improvements generally than it is about any type of paddling center or rowing center. This community facility, especially during the summer, I would say is probably used second only to Westwood Lake. I think of people sailing, fishing, swimming. The beach is always crowded there. And the change room and washroom facilities there, I believe, and Mr. Harding can correct me, date back to 1967. So this is an extremely old facility that needs upgrading, and I think we have a chance with community partners to do this. I don't want to wait on the expectation of federal funding. I want to move ahead with this while we've got a chance and while we have local partners. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just something referenced both by Councillors Thorpe and Turley around additional improvements. Just wanted to confirm through staff whether the budget number here actually did, maybe my recollection may be incorrect, but I thought the playground improvements were not included.
Through the chair.
Mr. Groot.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair to Councillor Brown. The improvements to the park itself and the playground are included in that range, because the range is, based on the discussions at the GPC, we still have that kind of lower to higher range depending on that public process, and there still is an opportunity to reach out as part of that public process, which was the intent to kind of show the community and other potential partners, where we are or how we got to this spot in regard to the conceptual design and the layout of the facility. And really the initial focus was around that programming need and potential community options. So there still definitely is an opportunity to take it out to the greater community and other partners to say, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you like to be involved, or could you, would you like to create a partnership? Those kind of things. So that opportunity has not been lost at this time. It's still a possibility. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity.
I just want to comment here that I appreciate Councillor Hammond's position on this. However, there is a strong Indigenous use of this facility as it exists and will be in the future. It is an underserved portion of the community to some extent. It is a very popular place. We're talking about a range of activities and users. So for what it's worth, I will be in support of it. If I see no other speakers, all those in favor and opposed, Councillors Bonner and Hemmons opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. All righty. Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Nothing to add?
The only thing I'll add is if we can skip ahead to slide number 43, and just goes through the next steps, which I kind of alluded to already in our previous presentation. But what staff will do now is we'll take away the information that, or the motions that were made today, and we'll incorporate that into our project plans, and then we'll bring that back to council in the fall for consideration at that time. So, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Then moving on, unless I see objection or concern, we have no delegations. Ms. Snellgrove reports, and the first is the Heritage Home Grant application, 347 Milton Street. Mr. Lindsay, this is a big one.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, after a morning of a very comprehensive presentation from Ms. Mercer and talking about tens of millions of dollars, we're here to seek Council's direction on $2,500. But as councillors, Your Worship, you know that certainly the cost of the project is not reflective of the value of the program, and the Heritage Facade Grants has been a long-standing, and from staff's perspective, certainly a successful program here in the city. We're specifically here today to seek your support for a facade grant for 347 Milton Street for the value of $2,500 for exterior work, including painting. And Mr. Scholberg, who's been waiting very patiently this morning, I know would be more than happy to answer any specific questions regarding this proposal. Thank you.
I can't remember where the quote comes from. What is it? They knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. So any questions for Mr. Scholberg? Mr. Scholberg, I'm sure you've made a very convincing case, as you usually do. Councillor Martman, you care to make the recommended motion?
I would like to move the motion, and as it's for $2,500, I expect extensive debate.
And Councillor Armstrong seconding. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item 7B. Nanaimo Search and Rescue Development of 195 4th Street, Phase 2. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Worship. This is a project opportunity we don't always bring forward to you, is that we're actually ahead of schedule on a project, which is the Search and Rescue Building on 4th Street. And if we recall, we went into a partnership with the society last year. They front-loaded the $2 million. We're well ahead of schedule, and we'd like to move it forward now to keep it moving. If there's any detailed questions or technical questions, Mr. Groot can also answer anything that council may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions before I ask for the motion? Councillor Martman? You're muted.
I move the motion as printed.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. We've done with 7C already. The next is 2 billion tree request for information. Mr. Harding. The Woody Woodpecker Hour here.
Thank you, Worship. Again, it's a report that was within three departments actually putting this together, including finance. It's an opportunity to move forward with an application for an interest on a planting program. As the report outlines, Mr. Lawrence, it's really looking at that whole Millstone watershed aspect, Millstone River watershed aspect that we could participate in and move forward. Again, if any technical questions, we're pleased to answer. Again, given the time, that's our quick introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. For what it's worth, I must say this is the kind of really practical, common sense, wonderful use of government money that I really appreciate. Is there any questions? If not, Councillor Martman.
Move the motion as printed.
And seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Brown, you're not opposed, I take it? No, thank you. Motion carries. Item E, draft amenity improvements concept. We've done with that. And next, F, statement 2020 statement of financial information.
Excuse me, Chair. I'd just like to jump in. This recommendation actually is different than what was presented in Laura's presentation. So could Mr. Harding please advise if we still do need this recommendation? Thank you.
Mr. Harding, sorry, bulldozing ahead. Tell me to slow down.
We're on Westwood. I'm sorry, my form is not. This is the Westwood one.
Yes.
On right now. Yeah. So again, Council, we wanted to make sure we kind of show the scope of work that what we're trying to do here. Whenever you mention Westwood Lake and any kind of improvements, of course, everyone thinks you're thinking of all the, the 200 acres of area. What we're really trying to focus on here is that gateway aspect, those initial amenities area that's heavily used, which is the swimming beach, the parking lot area. As Council may or may not know, we've been picking up some land in behind the old parking or the existing parking lot for a number of years. And as councilors have mentioned, the increased use of Westwood is amazing. Again, this is one of those projects that I don't think anything has substantially happened in this area since the 50s. It's an older type of design. We're really looking to get out to the public with, bringing the beach back off from the parking lot road, add more trails behind the beach, a number of amenities. So the draft that's on there are really things that we want to go up for people to pick from. It's not one or the other. It's those key amenities. And as mentioned also, we'd like to reach out to both the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness in this process, as well as Environment Committee in part of our engagement, but also those engagement processes that are going to happen over the summer.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martman. It's just a motion to receive. Are you moving?
There's actually a motion that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend the Council receive the draft ideas and improvement options at Westwood Lake Park for public review and direct staff to return with feedback and refined improvement concepts for Council's consideration.
And we have a seconder. Councillor Armstrong, any discussion? All those in favor, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick question, if I may. In looking at the design behind Mr. Harding there, there's a fair amount of, I'm hoping not pavement, but generally it is pavement in the past. And I was wondering if we could look at making that some more of a porous material like pavers or something along those lines when we do look at this.
Thank you, Chair. To Councillor Bonner, excellent question and point, and that's one of the things we're going to be looking for in our feedback. The cost of the paving and the benefit of doing some of the other ones. So those are things we want to look at. It's never fun to go out and plan a parking lot. Everyone sings Joni Mitchell to me whenever we talk about it, but it's definitely one of those issues that people are still driving up there in droves. So until we find another way to get there, people want them, so we have to provide some type of amenities.
Now, you're sure it's Joni Mitchell? Because I had this argument.
Oh, that's right. That's someone. Yes, I don't think she may not have sang it the first one, but whoever it was, so that's what everyone always says.
So maybe I did lose the argument. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now we're on to the item F, 2020 Statement of Financial Information. And is that Ms. Mercer again or Ms. Leggett?
It is, your Chair. So you'll get me for the next few reports. This is the 2020 Statement of Financial Information. So each year the city is required to prepare a Statement of Financial information, or the SOFI report, as we call it, by June 30th of the following year, per legislation. So the SOFI report is mainly made up of the schedule of remuneration and expenses. So this is a listing of all council wages and expenses, as well as a listing of all staff earning over $75,000 and their corresponding expenses. The other main section of the report is the schedule of goods and services. So this is a listing of all vendors who are paid over $200 or $25,000 during the year. And the report also includes 3 other areas. One is the schedule of debt, and all debt is included in Note 9 of the 2020 financial statements. And currently, at December 31st, the outstanding balance was $39.3 million in debt. There is a schedule of guarantee or indemnity. So all information related to this item is included in Note 12F of our financial statements for 2020, and we currently have a $2 million line of credit with the Port Theatre Society, and so we are obligated to record that in our financial statements. And the last item is a schedule of severance agreements, and in 2020 we did not have any severance agreements, so there is no information in the report for that. So just as a note for this report, the threshold levels have not changed in almost 20 years. So the number of employees and vendors will continue to increase until such a time as their thresholds increase. So that report continues to get bigger every year.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Mercer? If not, Councillor Martman.
I move the motion.
And we have a seconder. Councillor Bonner, any discussion? All those in favor?
Oh, I think Councillor
Bonner
has a question.
Sorry.
Oh, Your Worship, I just wanted to point out to everybody that I won, by the way, so I'm in favor.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. The next item is Fortis BC Vehicle Incentive Program. Ms. Mercer?
Thank you, Chair. This report is to advise the committee that the city has applied for and been awarded a natural gas vehicle incentive grant totaling $13,600 for the new automated refuse truck that will be ordered this year. So the budget for the new truck is $459,600. However, the RFP for the vehicle came in over budget, and this grant will help offset that shortfall. So this is just for information to let you know that we have been awarded that grant.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Brown has a question.
Thanks, Your Worship. Won't rant about Fortis here, but just a question around whether, I'm just curious in general, you know, I know there's, in the transit world, a lot of the buses are moving to electric. I'm wondering, just curious about these type of vehicles, and if we know if electric equivalents are being developed or on the horizon.
I will have to defer to somebody, and Mr. Rosen may know, or Mr. Rudolph, as I don't know what the plan is for fleet.
I can follow up to you a different time if
Sure.
there's no easy answer.
All right. If you're prepared to wait to get an accurate answer, that's good. Thank you. The next is the 2020 Annual Parking Reserve Fund Report.
So per the legislation, the city is required to prepare an information report to council on any parking statutory reserve funds that the city has by June 30th of the following year. So currently, the city only has one parking stat reserve related to the collection of cash in lieu payments for off-street parking, and that is the Old City Neighborhood Reserve Fund. So the balance of the fund at December 31st was $165,627, and we received one cash in lieu payment during the year for $39,000, and the fund earned $2,886 in interest, and we had no funding out of this reserve during the year.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this? If not, on to the next. Development cost charge.
Your Worship?
Yeah,
Yes, sorry, Councillor Bonner.
Sorry, just quick, and I asked this before, I'm not sure if I got the answer I was hoping. Can this reserve be used to build end of trip facilities for safe storage of bicycles?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So the purpose of this reserve fund is to fund the creation of off-street parking spaces in the Old City Quarter. So I would say in this particular case, possibly not, because it is directly related to parking spaces, but we could look at that if there was, that funding source could be looked at if a project came up for that. I guess you could consider it parking. I think it's meant more for vehicle, but we could look at that.
But does it say vehicle?
And I'd have to look at the reserved or the bylaw to see what specific wording it says.
I think it's a good point raised by Councillor Bonner. Yep. I think it would lend a certain ambiance to the area if we had appropriate parking for bicycles. There's no sense building bike lanes if people aren't going to ride them, and when they ride their bikes, they got to park them somewhere. We'll leave it in your capable hands, Ms. Mercer.
Okay, and I can follow up with that. Yep.
The next is the 2020 Development Cost Charge Reserve Fund Report.
Thank you. So like the last report, we're required to provide this information report on DCC statutory funds by June 30th. So the balance at December 31st in the DCC reserve was $56,751,703. So the activity during 2020, we received $7,877,509 in DCC revenue. The fund earned $1,037,909 in interest, and we used $1,647,250 in funding of projects out of this reserve. So just as a note, the DCC funds can only be used for projects outlined in the DCC bylaw, and the last bylaw was passed in 2018, and it identified those projects.
Thank you very much. Any questions? If not, on to the quarterly purchasing report, single and sole source purchases in excess of $150,000 and instances of non-compliance purchases.
Okay, so this report is for the quarter of January 1st to March 31st, 2021. Appendix 1 outlines our sole and single source purchases, and Appendix 2 outlines our purchases that were made for over $250,000. In this quarter, we had one instance of non-compliant with our procurement policy, and that was for electrical work that was being done at Bevan Park, where the scope of the project grew beyond the initial expectation. So we continued on using the contractor as they were already engaged in the work.
Nothing like a renovation to suck up money.
Yep.
If no questions, the final item is the one-time bonus gas tax funding.
So to the chair, we've kind of, I can go over what's in the report, but we've already allocated this funding. So I'm not sure there's much value in going over it anymore. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether you'd like me to go through the report.
I'm not seeing overwhelming interest from council. We have no other business. Before I ask for a motion for adjournment, I just want to say thank you to council, but no disrespect to council, more importantly to staff for enduring a much longer meeting than was anticipated. It's cut into lunch hours and other plans for many people, I'm sure. So thank you very much appreciated. A motion for adjournment, please. Move Councillor Armstrong, second Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Motion carries. Well done, everyone. Happy Wednesday today.